please join the Chaos Range Show. As you can tell, you see the amount of nice badge and custom emojis. Ooh. So as you can tell, join the Chaos Range Show. As you know, there are some perks. As you know, there are 2 tiers of membership. Membership 1, $2.99. As you know, the first membership, as it tells from the description, exclusive members only videos, and also some videos that will be only depending on the situation will be put on members. Not every video will be members only, but the ones that are members only or custom members only videos, you'll see mostly on the first tier. Stage 1, called Enter the Chaos, Stage 1. Now, the other one, the $7.99 one. As you know, there's early access to new videos, member shoutouts, photos, and status updates. Maybe I have to edit. I might not put no photos, maybe updates. I might. We'll see, depending on how many people join the top tier one. And like always, exclusive members and members only live streams. And personally, as this builds up, I might do the live streams members only here more, mostly, roughly, than what's given here. But we have videos, so depending what is I could put on here, it post mostly will be on the first tier. The second tier, depending how much is built up, there might be more exclusive live streams. Might be a little raw cut, uncut stuff, maybe on the members only True Chaos uncut version, which it speaks for itself. And another thing, if y'all did not know, there's a way why I priced the 2 memberships the way they are. If you could really understand the subliminal numbering of why I choose the first tier $2.99 and the other one $7.99, I'll say this. I doubt people's gonna figure it out, but let's say for the sake of conversation, they come across why I came up with these pricings. I might give you a maybe exclusive, maybe a shout out, or maybe more. Who knows? Maybe something special. Who knows? So, contemplate why I priced my channel the way it is. There's a certain codified code I use the numbers for a reason. I can't give you more detail than what I just gave you now. So I want you to think deeply on that when you catch the replay of this video. So those are membership.
Hey, what's up? How y'all doing? How y'all doing this afternoon? This beautiful Friday afternoon. Y'all know what it is. Look at the chat. Okay.
If you don't mind, let me start this off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to another session here on the Amir Browner Show. As you know, I go by the name Chaos Rain Show. And we know we have the elder again, returning once again, Christopher Grandison. And for all those that's watching and viewing today's broadcast, please make sure as you come in, hit the like button and also share this broadcast. And also, as you know, as the broadcast proceeds in the chat room, please subscribe to the alternate channel, the Great Liberals Roundtable. There's going to be plenty and more content over there to come. So please, as the show commences, subscribe and hit the top notification bell on that channel as well. You may proceed, Amir.
Okay. Yeah. So how's everybody doing? Of course, y'all. The audience has been growing, but y'all know we've had Mr. Grandison on before. Just discussing, a lot of these dynamics that gets talked about in this space from an evolutionary psychology perspective. To just kind of help give more knowledge and more information and context to to what's actually going on. And so today I said, well, you know what, this all this talk about submission and masculinity and femininity and what's the role of men and what's the role of women. I said it would be good to have them back on to discuss these things in a further detail, and not just be dealing with some red pill buffoon, or a femininity coach, but actually talking to someone who's actually educated and a scholar on a topic and understands it from an evolutionary perspective, understands the dynamics of gender, patriarchy, hierarchy, status bias, and these different things. And so I said, you know what? Part of our mission here is to make sure that our audience is amongst the most informed and intelligent on all of social media. So y'all hit the like button, and Mr. Grandison, if you want to go ahead and give a brief intro, your bio, and just inform the audience on on your book and what it is that you do.
Oh yeah, thanks, Amiri. Thanks for having me back on the show. It's nice to be back. So yeah, my name's Chris Grandison. I'm a teacher, educational consultant, psychologist. I wrote a book called The Racial Hierarchy. So that's really from my understanding of evolutionary behavior sciences. We don't really use that a lot in the Black community. So I felt it was something to introduce and bring into the debates and the different ways we analyze some of the problems in our community. You guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
You
Yeah,
guys
yeah, we
Go
can hear
ahead.
you.
Actually, you sound
good,
very
good.
clear, very clear, very clear, very clear.
Right. So evolutionary psychology, it's like a meta theory. It explicitly recognizes that the human brain has been shaped by evolutionary selection pressures. So all the problems we faced through the past several million years of evolving from this pre-human primate into the archaic humans and then eventually into modern humans, the brain was built to deal with all those problems we met during the past few million years. So now we're in the modern world.
Mhm.
We're not really facing a lot of those problems, but the our behavior is still really linked to life we experienced in the Stone Age. So this is why, even though we're in the modern
Mhm.
world, and a lot of behaviors we really don't need nowadays, and we wouldn't practice them, but the brain has evolved for millions of years to do just that. I mean, in fact, the
Right.
last 3 million years, the brain tripled in brain size. So really,
Mhm.
it's built for that time period, and that's why we still get a lot of behaviors that we're not really happy about today.
Right. Absolutely. And see, this is what I'm talking about. I like to bring actual academics and scholars on the topics that get discussed, because something that gets deployed in these conversations all the time is people who have a bullshit associate degree in introductory psychology, and then they're on these panels and discussions talking about they're a psychologist. You know what I'm saying? But don't even have a base understanding of what you're talking about when you're talking about uh, evolution and how the brain evolved, and how our behaviors are linked, and how environment shapes behavior. We act like behavior is somehow self-manifesting, when we just know, if you have a base understanding of evolution, that's that's not how it goes. It's all based off of environment. And so, with that being said, right, one of the things that we hear all the time is, well, this is women, and this is men, and power, dominant, submission. I would like for you, Mr. Grandison, to kind of give us your assessment and synopsis of those behaviors, and how accurate is the descriptions or the conversations that get had on these topics. How accurate is those conversations in terms of understanding those behaviors, both
Hello, yeah.
as it comes from men. Go ahead.
Hello, hello, you there? Is there?
Okay. Yeah. You come in and out, Amiri, but I get the idea of what you want me to say. And
Okay.
I want to start off with the naturalistic fallacy. So, what I've heard some people say is, because this is the way we live traditionally, whether that's 50 years ago or 1,000 years ago or for several thousand years and so on, that they'll say it's natural, and then people tend to implicitly perceive that as being, because it's natural, it's good. And that is a fallacy. Just because something is natural, it doesn't mean it's good. It's natural to catch malaria, but malaria, is not good. There's all kinds of
Right.
things that are natural for us to do, but that doesn't mean they're good. So when people appeal to say, okay, we did this for hundreds of thousands of years, that was the way it was for men and women. Men had their role, women had their role, and this is what we should be sticking to because that's what we've always done. That is the naturalistic fallacy. It does not mean we should continue to do that. We live in a moral and ethical society now, and we want to make changes to the way we have been living historically. So that's a good place to start. That natural does not mean good.
Right. Exactly. And something I talk about all the time is how we're living in a modern society now, and so precisely because you have these advents in technology, then it changes the necessity of certain behaviors. It is what it is. It's like again, when you're talking about you know behavior and things of that nature, it's all about now, real quick, in terms of evolution, can you, for the audience, speak to how uh, the environment shapes and molds the evolutionary process? Like, what is the purpose, and how does it uh, create these behaviors out of necessity as what's pertinent to the actual environment that we're in?
Okay, that's a good question. I just want to modify it a little. Do you want me to talk about historically, let's say the Stone Age, or the way our evolved nature is shaping our behavior today? Because I think some of the things you talk about, you may want to talk
Mm,
about male or female behaviors today, what may be causing some of these problem
mm.
behaviors we look at now. How is our ecology bringing out some of these negative or positive behaviors in men or women or just in society? So which one do you kind of want, the historical one or how we're affecting behavior today?
How we're affecting behavior today?
Right. So that's a good place to start. So some of the complaints, let's say, I don't know, we should start with men or women or do a little bit of both. So
A
I
little
know
bit.
you've heard me talk about. Right. So we've talked about
Yeah.
sex ratios before. So
Hmm.
that can affect behavior in very negative ways when the sex ratio isn't balanced. And it doesn't matter whether it's more men, less women, or the opposite. You tend to get bad behaviors anyway. There just may be a difference in those behaviors. So what you're seeing, and I know I'm talking to an African American audience, so we can talk to that audience. There's a lot more women and a lot less men. So now we're talking about within the African American community. They have the lowest sex ratio for the past like 150 years of any large ethnic group in the United States. Now, what that does
Mm.
in 21st century is it can nudge men to be more likely to practice short-term mating strategies. So this is, you're not really invested in a woman long term because you can get lots of women because there's lots of women around, but there's a lot less men around. So this the scarcer sex is kind of more in charge because you kind of have to do what the scarcer sex wants to attract a mate. So if there's less men around, women have to compete more
Exactly.
intensely to get those men, and that then puts the men in a position of what we would call dyadic power. So if men, what let's say men like a lot of sex, right? So they're going to want sex earlier,
Mm.
and they're going to want to have more sexual partners because that's how the short-term sexual strategy works, and they are in the powered position to kind of demand it. So this means women have to
Mm.
switch their strategy more to what a man wants. Now, a lot of this takes place unconsciously, and we always have to remember that when we're talking about psychology. A lot of this is going on
Right.
unconsciously. So if you're thinking, I don't think that way, or men I know don't think that way, or women don't think that way, it's not conscious. You're not aware of it, and they're not aware of it, but we can definitely see the pattern in the population as that takes place. And I can explain what happens if we reverse it if you want to.
Right. Okay. Now, boom, exactly what you're talking about. And this is the thing. This is what
Mm-hmm.
grinds my gears with these conversations, uh, uh, Mr. Grandison, is because we want to have these conversations in a dishonest way, and we want to, and I'll just be single motherhood rate and the condition of the black community. But at the end of the day, this is all operating off of the fact that we have this gender ratio imbalance in the scheme that men use when you have this type of gender ratio imbalance, where because they're the scarcer sex, like you said, dyadic power, like they're leveraging that to get the women to be acquiescent with what they want sexually. You know what I'm saying? But then they'll turn around and want to shame these same black women and acting like it's them, but they ain't got nothing to do with it as men. So yeah, build off of that more, and explain for the audience how that affects and shapes the community, family structure, and out of wedlock birth rates.
Right. So it has unfortunately a very powerful effect on that, because when males have dyadic power, that's really just bad all around for a community or a society, because they're not going to be investing, or they'll be less likely to invest in women and children, and women can be less likely to think they are going to get the resources from a male, because in your ecology you're looking at men being more likely not to support the female. So we're seeing this a lot in the African American community right now. There is a positive effect of it, in that African American women are tending to push harder, be more successful educationally and in the employment sector, because they know they're operating without a net. A man isn't going to come along and sweep them off their feet and take care of all their needs. They got to do it for themselves. So we're seeing a higher level of educational attainment and achievement in the employment sector. So right now, for every degree a black man earns, black women are getting 2 degrees. So that's good for black women, but in a way for their community to work as good, what women want from a man on its met. Black men right now in America, they have a lower socioeconomic in their community, because if the women are more highly educated and they are more likely to be employed, that men within their community, and that's the only community, so that's the only race where you can say that. The other races in America, it's reversed. It's men who have the highest socioeconomic rank in terms of being the breadwinner. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just saying you were coming in choppy over the last several minutes when you were talking. I don't know if
Okay.
it's something. Yeah, you were breaking up. Do you want to go ahead and you sound good now? I don't know what the issue is with the signal. Do you want to go over what you were just saying really quick again?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell me where I left off. I'll pick.
I'll tell you where we left off.
The last thing I heard you talk.
You left off during where you talking about saying the degrees. One man get 1 degree, the women get 2, and he says good thing. That's where you left off. All right, you can continue. You hear me?
African American women are earning place high school, undergrad, and postgraduate degrees. So African American women are basically earning double the amount of educational certificates, whatever you want to call it, than African American men. And then with a shrinking pool of eligible marriageable black males, as long as they are mating endogamously, so within the African American community,
hold on, Mr. Grandison.
It's very competitive.
Yeah.
Women.
Mr. Grandison?
Yeah.
Can you
Mr.
jump down off
Grandison.
the studio and come back? I think your audio is now breaking up.
I come back. Because yeah, you're breaking up really bad.
Just leave the
To my
studio
audio.
complete.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So now
I got
y'all
that.
hear what he's saying.
Go ahead.
Hold on, Cass. Y'all hear what he's saying. Everything what he's basically doing is showing how how these sisters aren't lying. That when you look at the condition of the black community, we see where it's coming from. So they can sit there and talk all of this bullshit they want, trying to blame these women. Now, see when he comes back, that's I hope we can really get this audio issue situated, because when he comes back, we're gonna talk about I want to drill down on the ego, the hurt ego of these men, how it hurts the ego on the men of these men. You see what I'm saying? That's what I when he comes back, that's what I want to talk about, because they're sitting up here lying. You see what I'm saying? But now, and why ladies, why y'all think I tell y'all they act like they're so jealous? Then they sitting here talking about married. It's these women they're lying. It's all lies. It's all lies at what they're saying, man. It's all gaslighting. This is a form of this type of group narcissism, and everybody goes along with it. That's why when you come back, I want to talk about this whole thing with, where where there's where we the stroking and the coddling of the black male ego, instead of just talking about these dynamics in a very real way. And this is why I say what I say, like what he was talking about with the gender ratio imbalance, like he said, for the last 150 years. And that's what I tell you, if you just go read W.E.B. Du Bois, he talks about it even then. But they're going to lie. But you know why they're going to lie? Because then the question becomes, okay, why do we have this gender ratio imbalance, and how do we solve it? How do we solve it? And the thing is, you have to solve it from a systemic institutional perspective, because these things are being fomented and caused by racism for the most part, because brothers are targeted. They're targeted. Even when we was going over the Tooth report, and it was sitting there talking about poverty, how it's about the men, just to protect their ego. David Johnson, them sitting up there lying, being obtuse because they don't want to be honest. And so these things, when you look at the black community, when you look at the condition of black women, because of this stuff what Mr. Grandison is talking about, that's coming from the gender ratio imbalance, it's more readily visible in the women. But so you're back now, Mr. Grandison. Is the audio better?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you right now. Yeah.
So how's that? Is it good or choppy, or we
You
better?
good right now. No, you good. It's better.
Okay, think we're still getting a delay, but I'll try and pick up with the point that you left off. So with the
Okay.
sex ratio imbalance, it brings behaviors that we're not happy about within the black community out of black men and women. So I guess what people really want is your problem. So you've got, first, black men have poorer health. Less of them are actually born compared to the men of other groups. So for every 100 girls that are born, there'll be like 102, 103 black boys born. But for whites and Asians, they get like 105 or 106 per every 100. So they're starting off with more males.
His audio, dang man, his audio. Hold on, Mr. Grandison, you're still coming in choppy.
So this is something that seems to have to do with being from production of.
Nah, it's not. His audio. Your audio's still
the
bad,
black
Mr.
male population,
Hold
the
on,
ratio
real quick,
of
Mr.
that population, the poorer educational outcomes, that makes a lot of attractive as well. Men are addicted to drugs, things like that. So really a woman is looking for a man who is avoided all of those problems. But what it does is it really reduces the ratio to a very low degree. So some of the numbers I've seen, let's say in the past 10 years, was like 50, less than 50 per 100 African-American women. So marriageable black males compared to 100
Yeah, Mr. Grandison.
sexually active, available fertilizer that African American women are competing for. Now, those men that are smaller in number, they understand what I said before. They have dyadic power, so it makes them less likely to get married earlier. They tend to have, more relationships, and this obviously puts African American women in a difficult position, and they do a bit more of what black men will want. Now, when I say black men, I don't want to, let's say, put this the wrong way, because there are sex ratio problems around the world in different countries. So we see white men doing this, let's say in Latvia and Estonia. We see Latino men doing this in Paraguay. We've seen it historically in several countries as well. So really, once you have this less men, more women, we see a pattern behavior out of men. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Asian, whatever. You're going to see that
I don't know what's
behavior
going on. Yeah, Mr. Grandison,
so to speak, in terms of developing. Hello?
Hold on, Mr. Grandison, because you're still coming in real choppy. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I don't know why we have a delay, because there is a delay and it's choppy. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on. But I don't think it's on my side. I don't know if it's StreamYard or if it's your signal or your connection, but it's just coming in real choppy right now.
It's too bad, because I'm right next to the router, so I'm about as good as the connectivity is going to get in terms of being close to the signal source.
Right. Let me see. Let me see something. Go ahead and finish saying what you were saying, Mr. Grandison. I gotta go. I'm gonna go see something right quick.
Right. So the point I want to finish with, that low sex ratios tend to increase women's what they call sociosexuality, which means more unrestricted or short-term in their mating strategies and more risky sexual behavior. And this tends to be what they have to do to attract a man in a low sex ratio environment. Now, notice I said women, I didn't say black women. So this is what happens in low sex ratio environments around the world and historically. Can we still hear me?
All right. I'm listening. I'm noticing. Yeah, guys, gotta be patient. Like always, these things happen. But I follow you a little bit, Mr. Grandson. My question, in regards to the importance, because a lot of guys don't understand that women are pergamous by nature. Why this is still a conflict, especially in the modern era we're in, especially in the West. I can't speak for Europe, but like the brain of the beast, America is the belly of the beast, and no different per se. Why is this such an issue between modern men about this pergamy issue, and they're still fighting it today, to a point where if this is what I guess certain women want, I mean, why are you still trying to give in? I mean, that's my question. If you want me to phrase it, but that's fine.
Well, so yeah, women's sexual psychology, it is built around attracting the kind of man who can help them, because obviously women get pregnant and they need support, when they get pregnant and raise children. So attracting a man with no social position, with very low status and rank, that's not going to be to the advantage of the woman who wants to build a home with a man who can actually add something to that home and help her support children. So all women, this has nothing to do with being American or what race you are. This is millions of years of evolution of women doing better if they attract a man with some social rank and prestige and success. So this tends to make female sexual psychology hypergamous, where if they can attract a man with a strong social position, some prestige and rank, some generosity and warmth and kindness, so the status and then the psychology of being kind and warm and generous and loyal, they go together, because it means then the man will be generous and committed with his resources. And when a man does that, obviously that's great for the children, because the children get great support, the woman gets support and protection from a man with some social position within that community or tribe or so forth. So this is a part of female mating psychology around the world. It's not specific to any one community, race, or ethnic group. This is how Homo sapien females tend to choose their mates. If they can, they get a man of higher social position. And it is a logical thing to do because it leads to greater survival and reproductive benefits from a woman's perspective.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
real quick on that part. Now, how does that change
Speak up, Amiri.
with the environment? So, okay, hold on.
Y'all can hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, so what I was saying, in terms of that, Mr. Grandison, how does that correlate to the environment? So, for example, right, if you were say we were back in before you had modern society where you were living off of the land, right? What would a man's status be based on in that type of environment? Because obviously because now we have these centralized industries and you have fiat currencies and economies and stuff like that. But prior to the modern era, people lived off of the land. So how did the environment and his ability to successfully oppose the environment
Historically,
affect his status? Yeah, like, you see what I'm saying? Like how his it's a relative thing based on the environment. You see what I'm saying? So, for example, if we say we were living back at a time before we had grocery stores where you go get a pack of chicken or whatever, and now you got to hunt for your food. What would up his status? Being able to be a successful hunter, right?
right. It could be successful hunter, but it also could be skilled in other ways. So you could be a shaman. You could be skilled in, let's say, designing weapons. You could be skilled in terms of coordinating activities within the tribe in terms of dealing with other tribes. So it's kind of anything that's going to raise your social status within that tribe. So being a great hunter, that's definitely a big one. Being a great warrior also. And for women as well, because women would have status too. So if they were, let's say, skilled at being a forager, or let's say healing people, teaching other women skills with their children, foraging, clothes, all those kinds of things, anything that's socially valuable, if you are skilled at it, it's going to raise your rank within that social grouping, within the tribe. So there's many things that could do that. It could even be, let's say you're a skilled storyteller. Like today you see comedians, they attract a lot of women, right? Even the ones who aren't good looking. But, they could tell great stories. So you got to remember, we spent, hundreds of thousands of years sitting around the fire in terms of as tribes, and we would tell stories. And if you're really good at telling those stories, storytelling is big in our psychology, that would raise your rank as well.
Right. Now let me ask you this. What about the male ego? Like, because this is something that, and this is why I do what I do over here on my channel, and it's because of this push that we see in modern time for towards misogyny. So if you could give us some evolutionary insights on misogyny and why men will cling to misogyny. Well, like how do we give us a better understanding of that?
Yeah, well, that if we're talking about broadly on average in general, because you can have some really, individuals who are quite extreme in terms of wanting to harm women, and they may have some type of mental disorder or dysfunction or something like that in their development. But in terms of, let's say, an average level of misogyny, where men, they tend to want to control female reproduction. And let me remind you again, we're talking about unconsciously. So when we say control female reproduction, they want to control access to sex. And because, reproduction is the result of sex, so scientifically, they will say they're trying to control female reproduction. But it's really sex that they want to have access to. Now, if you can't, just gain it by having a massive level of prestige and success and attracting women very, very easily, like a rock star or someone like that. Men can be physically more coercive in terms of, let's say, using reputational damage, or even leading to, let's say, the threat of physical violence and aggression to control a woman or a group of women in the interests of what men want. So they can create social norms that will harm the social position of the woman, her reputation. And so men will put a lot of these things in place to get women to behave in a way that is to the advantage of males. And so it can say, if you behave
Exactly.
A, B, or C, then you're going to get this bad reputation. And because a woman doesn't want a bad reputation, she will then tend to behave in accordance with these social norms that coalitions of men have put in place.
Right. Now check this out. And this is what we see on these podcasts and stuff like that, day after day, night after night, Mr. Grandison. Check this out, and then I want to kind of drive home the point with this.
Sacrifice so much of my life. Can I at least get laid? You know what I mean? I've been robbed of most of my money. Can I at least get a blowjob? If I wish one of your guys had children, if I could kick them in their fucking head or stomp on their testicles, so you could feel my pain, because that's the pain I have. Waking up every
So can we talk about what happens when you have like sex deprived men?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. So look, sex is important because it leads to reproduction, and reproduction is our genes moving to the next generation. So evolution has designed us to want to find ways to do that. And there are usually many socially acceptable ways for us to do that, to put ourselves in position to gain sexual access. Now, what happens is, if you are not in that position, if you are struggling for some reason, let's say you're socially awkward, or you don't have that social rank to attract women, then you start to behave in ways to build that. So that can include, let's say, higher levels of risk-taking to then gain the resources that will then lead to you attracting more women. So this is how you can get, let's say, violent criminality. Usually the criminality is not just mindless, it's in the effort to acquire, let's say, physical resources, material resources, which then lead to social resources, which is being more respected, perceived as more prestigious and attractive and successful. So if you're not getting it in mainstream acceptable ways, then it can lead to, certainly in today's world, what we would call maladaptive behaviors, where there's higher levels of risk-taking and violent criminality in the effort to gain these things that you can't get normally. So whether it's incels who, they're not able to attract women, they're getting frustrated, and now they're forming coalitions to them actually do some violent things. But a lot of that can be from, just being socially very awkward and not knowing how to get it the right access to females. They are designed to then change their behavior and engage in the type of behaviors that they think will, well, not really thinking, it's just more an adaptive strategy. So it's kind of unconscious, but the risk-taking tends to lead to being more successful. So if we look at it from an evolutionary point of view, then I'll bring it into the modern world. So if you were, let's say, in the Stone Age, and you weren't attracting women, you're not a good hunter, you're not a good warrior, you're not a good shaman, well, you're not attracting women. So you've got to change your strategy. What you're doing isn't working. So you got to take risks. So when you do have a fight with the other tribe, you have to get out there in front and you have to kill some men. Or maybe you got to climb the high trees where there's killer bees there and get the honey. Or you've got to bring home, the wildebeest or something like that. You've got to take the risk. So if you get out there in front of the herd with the buffalo might kill you. But if you kill the buffalo, you've taken the risk and you've increased your reputation now. Or you become a great warrior by killing some men. Or you've risked everything to go and get this honey when these bees might kill you. But you see how they've increased their risk-taking and they've become more aggressive and violent. And this can be with other men as well. So when another man challenges you, it can harm your reputation if you don't step up to him. So with everyone else looking, you're going to step up now and be firm and say, listen, I can't have my reputation harmed anymore. I already have low status. So when this guy challenges me, I have to step up to it. I cannot step back. Even though this guy may beat me, I'm going to fight as hard as I can because I can't lose any more status. So that's the behavior pattern of how they try to increase the risk taking. That would happen from an evolutionary point of view. Now, when we bring it to the modern world, this is why you get men engaging in drug dealing, or let's say in the Old West, you call a man a liar. They're pulling out guns and shooting each other because if your status is already low, you can't afford for it to get any lower. So this is why working class men kill and are much more violent than, say, middle or upper class men, because middle and upper class men already have some social rank. So they don't have to fight for it anymore as aggressively as the men who are on the lower ends of our society, let's say the working class men. So this is why they tend to behave that way much more at the working class level, because their respect and rank in society is already low, can't afford to lose anymore. So a man disrespects you, you're ready to be violent quite quickly.
Right now, and see, and like you just mentioned, working class and stuff like that. So that's the class component. Now, I want to right quick focus on the race component. So what happens when you're in a racist society where, because of your skin color, because you're black or you're seen as the inferior race, how does that then play into it? Wouldn't that, I mean, I would think that would cause a hyperization of these dynamics and behaviors you just mentioned.
Yeah, it does, because I'll say so as black people, we are perceived as, the inferior, the lower status type of human. So you're in a society where by race, you're already socially, in terms of your reputation, at the bottom. So now amongst those working class black men, and this I think leads into a lot of things that you talk about. This is how you get into what's going on with the manosphere and the black manosphere. So the manosphere, in terms of just men in general, because global trends in economic structure changes, automation, robots, software that's taken a lot of these jobs. Working class men, now this is all races, they're tending to really feel it economically. Their status is being lowered because they don't have the same position in the employment market anymore. But with black men, it's really acute in the United States. So they are at a much lower level than even the other races, because of course we deal with discrimination in the employment sector and in education. But these are, of course, how men achieve status in mainstream ways, through education and getting good jobs. So now with the jobs gone overseas because of globalization, and then with even the ones that come back, they're now being given to robots and artificial intelligence software. So this is the getting hurt in the employment sector. It's really got black men's status really low. And then at the same point now, they're seeing black women do a lot better than them educationally and in the employment sector, which really makes it it creates a divide and a schism between the mating strategies that men and women employ. So this is why you have the manosphere in general, and why you have the black manosphere in particular, because male status is being lowered, and then female status is coming up. Now, all humans are sensitive to status. So if I'm winning the race, but you're closing me down now I'm going to get worried, and I need to stay ahead of you. Now, this is what is not happening. We're creating a more, gender equal society, but because men have traditionally been ahead, now they're feeling very, very uncomfortable about women pulling alongside even moving past them, which they are. So the normal human reaction is to try and do something about that, to respond negatively. So you're seeing a status sensitivity response to women. And if we're speaking about the black community, or let's say the African-American community, to black women pulling alongside black men and pulling ahead of them. And the statistics show they are pulling ahead of them in terms of education and their participation in the labor market.
Right. Absolutely. And this is all that I talk about when I have these when I have these conversations, the thing of all humans desire status. You know what I mean? I mean, we all have an ego. We all want to have a sense of self worth and purpose on this planet. You know what I mean? So that's really great what you just was talking about. And so even how you mentioned like the status sensitivity, right? Something that I've noticed, and I don't know if you would agree with this term, but what I've been calling it is vagina envy. Do you think that that is a accurate characterization of what we're seeing from many of these modern men?
Wait, I'm married before you
Nah,
answer.
I can't agree with that. I
Married?
would call it vagina envy.
Hello?
I can't
Okay, never mind.
scientifically I can't agree with that. But what I can
Okay.
say is this: it
Wait,
is
before you.
first of
Oh,
all, men are more driven to gain status than women because
mm,
men attract women based on their status, whereas with women it tends to be a bit more through what a woman looks like. Now, there's a lot
Right,
of what's equal between men and women. There are just some tendencies on either side. So it's not like men
right,
don't pay attention to the status of a woman. We do. And it's not like, women don't pay attention to how good a man looks. They do. It's just that
right.
men are a bit more extreme in terms of paying attention to what a woman looks like, and women are a bit more extreme in paying attention to the social rank of the male. So now we've got these
Okay.
labor market
Right.
problems and educational problems. It gets in between all of this. So it creates
Mm,
conflict in terms of the mating strategies matching up. So this is where we get in the conflict.
right.
Now, what I've noticed with the manosphere is, they're blaming, let's say, feminism. They're blaming women for some of these problems. And I'm not saying there are some issues in feminism to talk about. I'm completely supporting feminism with regard to equality and creating egalitarianism and gender equal societies. I think some of the issues are where if we want to talk about some of the problems boys and men are having in education now or in the employment sector and saying, hey, we need to help these men. Some feminists don't want any talk about that. When we can have
Right.
a co-development model, we can have the men and women advance together. We can support continued girls and female advancement while saying, okay, we've got some problems with boys and men too, and we can help them out as well. But if we talk about the boys and men, some feminists say, no, you're taking away from creating gender equal society. So we don't want to hear about any problems with boys and men. It's a lie and whatever. And that's just not true. We know statistically now, boys and men are really struggling. And certainly if we look at black boys and men, there are serious problems to address. And
Right.
I want to make a point here. This is where the black manosphere recruits people, because responsible people aren't talking about these problems that boys and men are having. And if the responsible people and the people who are looking at good statistics and good behavior science and bringing it into the mainstream, if we don't have that conversation, that then leads the irresponsible people, the people who are, have selfish interests, they can step into that vacuum and tell these men
mm,
who are struggling, hey, you're struggling because of the women, you're struggling because of feminism, you're struggling because we've got some matriarchal society and they're dominant, and all of this is rubbish. But
mm.
there's an ear you're going to want to listen to that, because the mainstream responsible people aren't really addressing some of these problems boys and men are having. You have to do.
Exactly.
Amir.
Well, real quick, hold on, Cass, because before I forget, because this is what I'm talking about. This is why I said what I'm trying to do is lower the temperature of these conversations. Because if you have idiots on these platforms all day, like Andrew Tate and the rest of these uh gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, talking this dumb shit about inherent natural male dominance and preeminence, and somehow making this argument that what we see in the progress of women is merely socially engineered, then what you're in fact doing is creating an environment where the responsible people have to continue to kowtow to feminist ideologies and feminist agendas, because feminists that's the way that feminists have presented the dynamic between the genders, when the fact of the matter is that male dominance is also socially engineered. And so this is why I'll make the argument to men who will say, well, men are just inherently uh, uh, superior. Well, then, okay, if that's the case, then how can any level of social engineering make you subordinate of subservient to that which you're naturally superior to? If you're superior, then you're going to always be superior, irrespective of the social engineering. And so the point that you just made, Mr. Grandison, is exactly why I do what I do and why I tell these guys what I tell them, because all you're doing is adding fuel to the fire to where we can't have these conversations in a real balanced way to say, look, modern men, because of all these changes that they're not in control of and that the women aren't in control of, are having a rough go of it. So how do we actually have this conversation with responsible people so we can implement things that do help modern men and not take anything away from the policies and egalitarian social policies that are helping women. And this is why I say what I say. When you present the stuff as a zero sum game as men, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, because the people who are responsible are going to be beholden to the way that feminists have presented these dynamics. And so now, as men, you're just going to end up with what you started with. If this is exactly what's happening in this social discourse because of idiots like Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate don't know what the hell he's talking about. This is just a guy talking.
All right. Mary, if you may,
Mhm.
if I do, before we continue, we're almost at the hour mark. For those that's watching, and welcome to the Mary Brown Show. As you know, what's pinned on top of the chat room, is the new channel, the Great Liberals Roundtable. If anyone of y'all that's watching right now, please subscribe and hit the top notification bell. There are gonna be some uploads over there as well, so check out the content on that channel as well. And as you see, we have people that has contributed to the channel so far. So let's look at this quickly. Sexy Red, a 0.99 super chat. Thank you. London Turner, great conversation, $50. And as you go down to the other contributor, Mrs. Dutchman, she writes with her $20 super chat. I believe the reason slavery lasted so long was because men got what they call unearned sex with many enslaved women for free. Slave masters breed instead of what they call communities called castration, like more typical of history. Is that a fair characteristic? And use certain numbers. So if you want to post it and share it, be better so Grants can see it. America, I'm trying to read that. I think that was a question.
Right. Let me see. She said, I believe a reason slavery lasted so long was because men got unearned sex with many enslaved women for free. Slave masters bred instead of castration, like more typical of history. Is that a fair characterization? I think she's making a juxtaposition here, Mr. Grandison, between maybe in more ancient times, men who were slaves would be made eunuchs, whereas opposed to in the more recent episode of antebellum American slavery, black men were treated as bucks. And she's asking, is that a reason why maybe it lasted so long?
No, I'd have to disagree with that. I mean, who wants to be held in that condition? More important,
you could take that down.
Think about the orientation in terms of male side. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we're listening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're clear.
Yeah. So, first, right, the slave masters were controlling, in terms of the slaves who could have sex. So, men definitely don't want to be controlled that way, and they certainly don't want their status as the lowest it possibly can be in a society. So, you wouldn't want to choose that, because if you're not a slave, you're going to have more sexual access than a slave who isn't, because if you're working, then you're going to attract women. So you're still going to have sexual access, and you'll have better sexual access than a slave would. It's not like unearned, because if the slave master is deciding who can breed, he may be deciding, well, you're tall and you're strong and you can have sex, but a lot of men are not tall and strong. So a lot of men are actually not going to be having sex at all. And we knew a lot of men actually weren't reproducing, because when we look at the genetic background of African American women, we can see there are some studies that show for every 15 black women who were reproducing, only one black male was reproducing, meaning the other 14 black males weren't having any sex at all. So that's not something that men would want to put up with. That's really on pain of death. That if they violated the rules and didn't do what the master did, if they tried to have sex where they weren't allowed to, they would be killed. Because if one man is
Right.
reproducing with, let's say, 15 women, then 14 men are going without sex altogether. So a lot of men, the majority actually weren't getting sex, certainly in some enslaved societies. But we see that very common throughout North, South America, and even the Caribbean region when we look at the genetic studies. I actually put that information in my book.
Right now, let me ask you this, Mr. Grandison, and Beige Negra. She asked, "Will there be an opportunity?" And I appreciate the super chat, y'all. Do continue to support the show. Y'all can, hit the Cash App. That's the Amiri Brown Show. $ Amiri Brown
Yeah,
Show.
you can ask
But
questions.
Beige Negra, she says, "Will there be an opportunity to ask?" Yeah. There'll be a question and answer portion. So okay, so now and because me, I want to deal more with the race component, right? So let's look at this from an evolutionary psychology perspective. uh, what what is the the reason or the impetus for misandric aggression?
I didn't hear the full word.
The misandric aggression.
Misandric aggression. What type of
Yes.
aggression is that? Is that towards males?
But yeah, aggression
Right.
by males towards other males. Yeah.
So are you talking, let's say, that's young male violence that happens in some of the deprived neighborhoods, the shootings and stabbings, things like
Ex-
that?
exactly.
Right. So we compete most intensely with those who are our near equals, those who are on our level, right next to us, because that's the best way we can advance ourselves. We can't advance ourselves by going after a very high level target. We can't take their place. But the people who are near equals to me, those are my competitors. So those are the people you're going to compete against. So one of the examples I use in my book and on my YouTube channels. I used to live in Brooklyn, New York, and I used to live in Crown Heights, and we live right next door to Hasidic Jews. The ones who dress up in the hats and they got the pigtails
Yeah.
next to their ears and all those kinds of things. So these guys used to live right next door to us in the same apartment buildings and so on. Now, I'm out there dodging bullets and avoiding problems every day, and these young Jewish guys, they had no problem because none of the black guys were attacking them. They weren't robbing them. They weren't doing anything with them. And that's because the young Hasidic Jewish men were not our competitors. We didn't go to the same schools. We didn't go after the same girls. We weren't wearing the same clothes. We were in completely different social environments. So because they are not our competitors, we didn't even bother challenging them with regard to anything because there was nothing to gain. But when I challenged the other young black males around me, or they were challenging me, now that's my we're in the same cultural bubble, so to speak. So for me to socially advance myself, I have to compete with those who are near equal towards me in the same cultural grouping, because that's how I can advance myself, because the cultural values in that cultural bubble will define how I'm perceived, whether my reputation is good, average, or bad. Now, messing with some Hasidic Jewish kid, that's nothing to me. It doesn't advance me in any way, shape, or form. He's not a part of my culture. They're not respected. We're just in completely different social environments. So because we're in different social environments, I can't advance myself by, challenging them. But with the other young black men around me, I can definitely do that. And the way that is done, especially when you're on those lower levels, it can lead to violent social competition amongst those young men. So it's like I told you before, when your respect is already low, when your rank is already low, you can't afford to have that challenged. And this isn't racial. So I use, let's say, the example of in the Old West, we used to see these white guys shooting and killing each other at very high rates. And that's because, there was a lot of inequality, and the men at the lower levels of the inequality, you bump into each other, you call them a liar, they fight over the prostitutes, and they would kill each other. There were very high homicide rates among young white males on the Western frontier. And we've seen this, we've also seen this in the Chinese American community for 70 years, where, discrimination, racial discrimination held them down at a very low level. So there was a lot of drug abuse, there was a lot of gang warfare, There was a lot of drug trafficking, and they were killing each other at a very high rate, very high levels of criminality. So their homicide rates were like 3-4 times higher than the white Americans around them. But notice, the Chinese Americans weren't killing the white guys. They were killing each other. So they were killing the near equals who were culturally defined the same way as they were. So we see this pattern over and over again. I see it right here in the United Kingdom with young white men in Scotland who, the working class ones, they'll stab and kill each other at a very high rate. They had the highest homicide rate in Europe not too long ago. And they had to do a lot of work to stop these young white boys in Glasgow from stabbing and killing each other. So when the status is low, inequality is high, and you're on the bad end of that inequality, young men tend to behave or be much more likely to behave in using, violent social competition to advance themselves in that community or society.
Right. Now let me ask you this. What about submission? Because a lot of what the manosphere talk about and what it talks about on these red pill channels and stuff like that is submission, the submission of women. Give us the evolutionary psychology perspective on submission from women toward men that they're in a relationship.
Yeah, well, that's a bit. It's actually kind of funny, I mean. Well, look, we're kind of built to understand who to submit to, right? So, first of all, submit implies a desire. Right.
Right.
So, submit, it implies a desire to accept the dominance of whoever one is submitting to. So, what is being offered other than one's sexual identity as a male that would cause one to be willing to submit to? So, according to these ideas about submission that I'm hearing, say people accept a submissive position either by domination and threat and force and harm, or you could be, let's say, withdraw economic opportunity or support, or let's say you could, impose social reputational damage on someone. So with Black women now, if we're talking about the African American women, I already talked about, well, the Black women are doing better educationally and economically. So why are you submitting when you're actually in a higher socioeconomic position? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And I try and drill. Hold on. I try and drill down on that because what I tell y'all all the time, there's no such thing as submissive breadwinners. No such thing.
Right.
That's not the. Yeah, but go ahead, Mr. Grandison. We're listening.
And more importantly, if you have to ask for submission, then you're not offering or controlling any of those things I just talked about. So you don't have to ask for it. If you're in a dominant position, people will choose to defer to you because you're offering something. Either there's force and threat. Now, obviously, we do have a lot of domestic violence, and this is one of the ways that, let's say, a man of lower social rank can try and impose himself, let's say, in a relationship. He can use threat of force against a woman, or groups of men can do that. But in terms of, if you're socioeconomically wanting to offer something, well, African-American women are right now in a higher socioeconomic position. So it doesn't really make any logical sense to say, you need to submit to me. Well, hold on a minute. African-American women right now are the breadwinners in their community. And that's the only race where we can say that. But that is not a position that men are in now, where they can ask people who are in a higher social rank, basically, to submit to them. What are they submitting to?
Exactly. and my thing is this is okay. Well, if submission is all the rage and it's so great, then you should submit. You know what I mean? And that's the point that I make. Because of the socioeconomics and things of that nature, and you're not in the dominant position, well, then you should be fine with submission. I mean, submission is all the rage. They talk about submission as if it's the holy grail of behavior. You know what I'm saying? So it's just it's really convenient how they how they framed it. You know what I mean? And that's why I was just talking about the misogyny. Now,
right. I think they're wrong to be saying that, because what we want between men and women now is mutual cooperation. No one needs to submit and be dominated. You want to be a unit, you want to be a team, you want to work together. We don't need women submitting or being subservient. And look, if people want to talk about, well, our evolutionary history or the Stone Age, let me tell you something. The research shows that that was not the case. In the Stone Age, so our ancestral way of living, there was actually a lot of equality there. So sure, men would be more physically aggressive, but women's voices were heard. There wasn't this vast inequality between men and women. That there were no, chiefs or leaders. Okay, there was a lot of democracy in those tribes, and women's voices were heard. So this idea that it was just complete male dominance, and so, well, that came in when heritable wealth came in, and that kind of came in when we started practicing agriculture. You see much higher levels of inequality between men, first of all, because now you have the ability to build wealth over the generations. So some men were really poor and dirt, didn't get anything, but then some men were really wealthy, and this created this high level of inequality between men. And that allowed now coalitions of men to act and start this high level of male dominance in society. But through the Stone Age, when we were hunter-gatherers, and we can even see it today in modern day hunter-gatherers, they're actually quite egalitarian because it's kind of enforced. We do not like to be dominated. So those who wanted to dominate in that environment, we kind of ganged up on them and put them in their place and tried to keep things pretty equal and egalitarian. So this idea of, vast male dominance, well, yeah, you did have that for about 8,000 years, maybe taking it all the way back 12,000 years to when you get the agricultural revolution where those things occurred. That's when a massive level of male dominance occurred. Now, you got to remember, that's a very short period of time in terms of human evolutionary history.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
For 300,000 years, Homo sapiens, it was hunter-gatherer. And then in our archaic human forms, we can call that, let's say, 2 million years, we're still hunter-gatherers. And that's going to be a very more egalitarian style of living. So this idea of massive level of male dominance, it's actually very recent.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly. Well, go ahead, okay.
Well, Mr. Grandson, since this has been recent, could we also say that how can I say this? That when we look at the environment, and I hope there's a time period for this, right? That is it because, if we look at history, usually there was no like a serious class system. There was usually kings and queens that run the whole land. And at one point now, we see now the class systems has been structured. Could we say this all really start culminate around the 1700s, going on to 1800s, when it was like a shift? In regards, even the smallest president could what they call it be up there like the king and queen in regards holding certain resources. Can we say that?
I think I missed some of your question. Let me tell you what I heard, and then you can modify it and correct me. So you're talking about the period where you have let's say a class system where you got nobles and royalty with very high levels of wealth and power, and then the majority of the people are serfs and really poor and so on. So I heard that bit.
Yes.
Now what was the actual question?
Now, so in saying that, because I remember what certain groups of people like, I'll throw some names, like I say the Rothschilds or anyone's like the whole like horror like banking systems in place, that we see this now. We now witness this trickle down of certain wealth, and now we see people have like that's not kings and queens, but able to have the same access by controlling certain resources. And it's not just one, but like many other people. Because usually back in times, usually things were controlled by the top, like there was king and queen watch over everybody. But now as time progressed, it's like the common man, depending on what traditional or what they call it tribe background, has the capability now to hoard the same amount and be just as aligned with king and queens. But we don't really follow those king and queens now.
Yeah, the modern
in regards to control.
Are like the billionaires, and the people are able to use the economic systems to gain a high level of wealth and social power. So we're still seeing vast levels of inequality, and really it's a problem, and it's going to become a much bigger problem because of the way technology is going to make the labor market smaller. So it's going to concentrate wealth in the hands of a very small percentage of people. with the vast majority of people being, poor and not able to do certain things. Even in the wealthy areas of the West, a lot of people are going to be poor. And this is coming very, very quickly. So over the next 15, 20 years, as more and more of the technology comes in and starts to take jobs and make it very difficult, the levels of inequality are going to get very, very high. And the people who are doing really well, who are at the top, let's say these corporate people, the people who have the businesses, and the tech sector, it doesn't actually employ a lot of people. It's not like the old industrial manufacturing jobs where you had hundreds of thousands of people working in factories and so on. Facebook and Google and so on, they don't employ these vast, massive workforces because it's all technology now, even though they're making more money than these old style industrialists. So this is how inequality is going to get even more sharper and cause a lot of social problems. And I say, as Black people, we kind of have to have our own plan, because Western society isn't going to have any plan for us. We have to have a plan for ourselves, because people are perceived as having lower social value. So whatever is going to be made good for people, we're going to get the last. It's always like that, last hired, first fired kind of thing. That's the position we are in as a community. So we have to have our own ideas. We have to have our own collective action to deal with our own interests, whether it's education and our economics, because we can't think that these Western governments are going to put us on some kind of equal plane with the host dominant mainstream population that don't look like us. That's not going to happen. So we got to have a plan. And right now we're not acting like that. We're continuing to vote Democratic or Republican or whatever and think that's the solution to our problems. There are no political solutions to our problems that way. We have to act as a unit, as a community, educating and economically empower ourselves and control our own economics. That's the only way we're going to make it.
Right.
Mary, before you continue, Mary, because I got to step away briefly. And you're familiar with certain works, correct? You're familiar with a author named Amos Wilson?
Yes.
And yesterday was his Earth Strong, ironically, and it's surprised we talking about this today about controlling our own destiny. He said this back in the late 80s, around early 90s, about where Black people see themselves in the 21st century. You get me? And it goes to show that you think this European man is going to feed you before he feeds his children, you're delusional. He said this over almost 35, 36 years ago. And now we're at a point in our existence. Now it's showing that he's really is coming back. That he is going to choose his own before us. So if we don't make a certain direction for our own national survival, we are very much going to be left behind. Regardless of what he said that what's going to happen to Black people in the next 30 or more years. Right. He's already told you this decades ago.
That's an outstanding point, because that speaks to something that Miri talks about. So we can't have this divide between Black men and women when we're actually facing massive problems as a community. And if we have these conflicts between each other, when we should be acting collectively together, Black men and women building for this future that is going to be very difficult for us, because COVID gave us an example of what it looks like. So when white unemployment, let's say here in the UK, during COVID, it was like 13%. But Black youth unemployment, so between, let's say, 16 to 24, it was at like 34%. So it was triple the unemployment rate. And I know it was like that in America as well. So this means that the inequality that the Black community is feeling, it's triple what the white community is feeling. So we have to have a plan for that. Because let's say if white folks are complaining when their unemployment rate is at 13% or higher, and that's going to happen due to, automation, artificial intelligence, and robots, ours will be triple. So when they are, complaining, we will be killing each other at a much higher rate, because inequality increases the level of violent social
and that's what you're seeing now. And that's what you're seeing now.
Absolutely. So this is the type of stuff I speak to, I write about, and I talk about on my channel, and how society is basically selecting against us. So if we don't have our own plan, all of this bad stuff is going to continue to happen. Young men killing each other, Black men and women going at each other, not understanding the full dynamic of what is causing the schism between us. Because if Black men, let's say, aren't understanding globalization, or artificial intelligence, or the level of discrimination in society, that because they see black men as more threatening, they act more against holding down black men than other men. Black men are perceived as so physically threatening that the negative psychological response to them, it happens in education, it happens in the medical industry, it happens in the employment sector, and of course, we all know it's horrific in criminal justice. So this is what's causing a lot of dysfunctional behavior in black men. Some black men understand it, some don't. And some black women understand it and some don't. So if the black women are looking at the bad behavior of the black men and just saying, hey, these black men are effed up, they just want to misbehave. Well, no, we have to understand how the ecology puts so much pressure on them that it causes a lot of maladaptive behavior. And unfortunately, a lot of that behavior is going to spill over and be visited upon black women by black men. But we've got to understand the foundational causes of the bad behavior and address that as black men and women moving into the future together to address these problems. Because look, as long as black men are getting screwed up, they will screw up the community. But they are not choosing to be screwed up just to be screwed up. There's a lot of ecological pressure on black boys, first of all. And of course, that's going to lead to them becoming men who engage in dysfunctional and maladaptive behaviors. When we look at the school discipline or the diagnosis of ADHD on black boys, it's terrible. And we're seeing the same thing here. I'm seeing so much black boys under all kinds of pressure. Now, of course, these boys grow up and, to a higher percentage, we're going to see the poor behaviors, the drug addictions, the misogyny, and so on. We have to address them at their core. We have to do it together. We cannot make it as a community with black men going one way or blaming black women and blaming feminism. Feminism is nothing compared to the fear Western society has of black men. If you go to my channel, you'll see a bunch of lectures called Neo Group Selection. Watch all those parts and you'll understand what black men are facing and why we can get into these dysfunctional behaviors in our society, including domestic violence. So
right. Now,
you got to be scientific about it.
Right. Now, let me ask you this, because I totally get everything you're talking about here. And, and something I talk about all the time is the ecology. And when we have these conversations, we do it without context. And so in order for me to bring context to the conversations that people want to have in a vacuum, it'll cause me to have to just kind of put it out there about what's really going on with black men. So I don't say these things to denigrate black men or to tear them down, but just to give them the very real world truth of what's actually going on with them. And it's just like what you was just talking about. So in terms of this dysfunctional behavior, with everything that's going on and that we're faced with as black people in America, in an ethno state, under an ethno state, would you consider this whole passport bro movement another example of dysfunctional black men?
I'm not sure I would characterize it as dysfunctional. I would just it's the same thing. Men, they want to attract women, right? And they want to put themselves in a more power position to do that. So if you're going from, let's say, one of these top 5 economies or top 10 economies, if you're a man in America or let's say the United Kingdom and Canada, and then you're going to a country, where the economy is ranked 50 for something, it makes that man much more attractive if he has, the economic means of an average man in the United States, and he's bringing those means to, a much poorer society. It's an artificial way to raise your rank really high, much higher status. Because look, if it was about, let's say, culture, right? Some of these men say, no, I don't want a Western woman. I don't want a woman with Western culture. If you're in America, you can get a woman from any society on earth who's just got there a year or two ago. So you can find a woman with a different culture in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and so on. So you haven't got to go to Brazil or the Dominican Republic or wherever they're going to say, no, I want a woman who has a different culture. Now, maybe they will respond and say, well, once they get to America, they start behaving differently. Well, that should tell you what they're really interested in, because their culture isn't going to change just because they move to America. You move to America when you're 25 years old, you're still going to be culturally the same person year after year after year, because you've grown up and evolved in the sensitive cultural learning period, which is the first 20 years of our lives in that other society. So your cultural psychology will still be the same. So if they're saying they want to be treated by these women differently than Western women treat them, you don't have to leave the country to find them. You can find them right there in America. What it is if you go to the Dominican Republic or, some African country or Asia, the Philippines, whatever, you're bringing the status of a Western man to these other countries, and it makes you much more attractive. And then those women are going to tend to want to do more what is in your interests. They will, let's say, behave in this so-called submissive way that some of these men are looking for. And to tell the truth, women do this too, right? They'll go to some of these poor countries, and then they'll attract some of these, attractive young men, whatever, marry them, they bring them back to the West. When the guy gets his papers, then he leaves the woman and goes to get someone else. And some of these women that, men may attract from these other countries, they do the same thing, because really it's about your wealth that is enhanced when you go to these other societies and make more attractive to those women. So there's men really are trying to put themselves in a social environment where they are much more attractive, and the women are much more likely to kind of act in the male's interest because they want something. They want access to that male's resources. If they take that woman and let's say bring them to America now, we may see a different story 5-10 years down the road. Once the woman has established herself, and she may decide to leave that relationship now and actually bring a man from the old country back home where she's from.
Yeah. Now, but this is the reason why I led with it, maybe being just another example of this dysfunctional behavior, is because to what you was just talking about, how we have to have a plan because all of these changes are coming and we have to be thinking about the long game. It seems like we're not, like, just as a community, we're not even on that right now. Like, everybody can see the tea leaves. We all know it's going to be bad, and like you said, if you look at COVID, it was a great example of how it's going to look. If you want to drill down on it even more, Hurricane Katrina, which I am a Hurricane Katrina survivor, that was a great precursor of what we're seeing. And so it's always this thing, and this is my gripe with many of contemporary brothers here in America, is there's always this thing where we always seem to be a day late and a dollar short, and we want to take these, this whole thing about leading from hindsight, but I never see us as a collective or as a group exercise any level of foresight. So when we have conversations with brothers about the necessity of actually planning and making moves, so we'll be in a better position and be able to withstand this jobs apocalypse that's coming. It's like talking to a wall. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I even mentioned it as, just being another example of dysfunctional behavior. But what are your thoughts on that? What would make us not want to, even though we can see the handwriting on the wall, not take any action and be proactive in planning and dealing with it?
Yeah, it's happening too late. So Chaos Rain mentioned Amos Wilson, right? So Amos Wilson was right on point. Right. We have to control our own education. You can't spend, the first 2 decades of your life as a community in mainstream education as a Black community and then think you've been educated towards solving problems and acting in your own interests in the Black community. We have to be educating our own children. I don't care if it's evening schools, Saturday schools, things like that. You can still have them in mainstream education, but then you need an education much more specific to your community's goals and objectives. So if you don't have that for the first couple decades of your life, you're now running around in your 20s and 30s just starting to learn the things you really need to learn. But it's too late. There are all kinds of cultural problems that are now taking place, and you really haven't been acting as a community towards your own interests. So Amos Wilson, even though he wasn't about the evolutionary perspective, that it was kind of not really around at that time, but he was on point anyway. So now we can take evolutionary behavior science and see how correct he was.
So basically, we are in someone else's cultural framework that supports them, and it disadvantages us. Even if we just look at, let's say, the racial definitions, it teaches us to look at our African appearance and our dark skin and all these African phenotypes and see them as less valued compared to the beauty standards in this cultural framework, because of course it's a European framework. But that means we are being educated in a European way, but we are not European people. So we are being educated against our own interests. So I mean, right now I'm a part of a school, which is a school where we teach at least Black adults. Now we're taking all these different scholars and we're teaching things that Black people need to learn. Everything is specific to Black people. So what I would say is you have to start early. If you don't have a plan that starts when children are 4, 5, and 6, you don't really have a plan, because you can't talk about this when you're college graduates. You're already losing for 20 years. Now, I want to mention a study here before we get off that point. There's a study by Raj Chetty, the professor of economics. I think he's either at Stanford or Harvard. He goes back and forth, but it's race and economic opportunity in the United States, and it's an intergenerational study. Now, he studied millions and millions of outcomes for Black children and white children over a period of like 30, 40 years. And I want to read to you, the conclusions of this study. Childhood environment has significant causal effects on Black-white gaps. Black boys do especially well in neighborhoods with a large fraction of fathers at home, in Black families, and low levels of racial bias amongst whites. Now think about that, because the effort to reduce racial bias, now I'm quoting him now, efforts to reduce racial bias among whites and interventions to reduce discrimination in criminal justice was his solution. So this says that both problems in terms of the lack of fathers at home and the level of racial bias is a part of discrimination in American society, because discriminatory practices against Black men is harming Black families. Now, I'm not going to say it's the only factor. There's other factors that we have to deal with ourselves, but that is a significant factor that we have to be aware of. There are also cultural factors that we have to deal with. So this is when I'm talking about educating our community towards the problems we have at a scientific level and then addressing them. This is what I'm talking about. Conversations like this amongst Black people, where we can now shape our education and then our actions to deal with something like this. Because complaining about this to your local elected official, that's not going to do that. You can't deal with efforts of racial bias and mass incarceration by that. You have to deal with these young men at a very early age. You have to deal with families and communities, because we can avoid this if we educate ourselves the right way.
No, I mean, I agree with you, and I'm glad you mentioned mass incarceration, because again, when I'm having this discussion with these manosphere guys and these red pill buffoons, what they want to do is they want to deflect from those type of very real systemic discriminatory practices that are meant to create exactly what we're seeing in terms of family structure. The thing that I push back against is that they want to try and divert away from that, and they want to project it onto Black women and make it the fault of Black women. So they choosing Pookie and Ray Ray, these false constructions of Black masculinity. When if you look at it, so for example,
hold on, let me stop you right there, and I can deal with that point. So this dealing with Pookie and Ray Ray, right?
Right.
So in a low sex ratio environment, women's sociosexuality will increase, and because they know that they can't rely on the economics of a man, they make different decisions with regard to the males they choose. So when we're talking about this Pookie and Ray Ray stuff, first of all, they know Pookie and Ray Ray ain't got no money, but they're not looking for that. They now start to look for, well, how can I benefit myself in a different way? And this is when humans can tend to make genetic decisions instead of the socioeconomic decisions. So what I'm trying to say here is, when they think that Black women are just making some silly decisions, they actually, and this isn't, about one race of women or another. We see all women doing this in low sex ratio environments. They can now switch to a different mating strategy where they start to think about the genetic quality of the male as opposed to the economic and the prestige and the success that the male has. So we would call this, a calibration of mating strategies to a different ecology. This is what I mean about applying science. Because when you're just saying, oh, black women are making stupid decisions, they're just going with Pookie and Ray Ray. Well, hold on. What about the black men who are making stupid decisions, not going with the long-term strategy in terms of how they deal with a woman? Because this is what our community really needs. So if we want to say, well, black women are making stupid decisions, black men are also making stupid decisions, because a short-term mating strategy weakens our community in competition with other communities. So when we're talking about the white community or the Asian community and so on, if they have long-term mating strategies, that means their children are developing in a much more stable and secure environment. Their children will outcompete our children because black men are engaging in short-term mating strategies. Now, to be fair, this is because of the low sex ratio environment. And a lot of that is mass incarceration and homicide and the discrimination and inequality and so on. So we can look at the foundational causes, but don't look at this a conscious level and say, okay, black men are doing this stupid thing and black women are choosing Pookie and Ray Ray. The ecology is putting pressure on black men and black women to make these decisions unconsciously. Don't think about it consciously, because you're going to make a mistake and you're not going to get it right. The ecology is telling black women, you are not going to be supported. So maybe think a little bit more genetically in terms of your reproductive success, meaning you may choose a man who's physically attractive, got good genetic quality, but he's not going to support you, but you get a genetically healthy child.
And that child may grow up and be successful, and she can get resources that way, right?
Yeah, there is a tendency to think that way. So in terms of if you're in a tough ecology, this can be tough on children as well. So if you choose a man who has more genetic quality, then this enhances the ability of that child to survive a harsh ecology. Now, again, it's not conscious. It just seems to be something women tend to do when they are in harsh, unstable environments, and particularly if there isn't a lot of, let's say, socioeconomic support from a man. This is when women's mating strategies can tend to switch, especially when they have to compete harder to even get a man because there's less men around. So this, I mean, I've heard this thing about, yeah, they choose Pookie and Ray Ray and they're single mothers because of their own choices and stuff. Well, hold on. It took two to make that happen. If they're saying they chose a bad male, the truth is there are higher percentages of males behaving that way because we have a low sex ratio, causes men to want to have short-term relationships with more women at the same time. So if we want to be scientific about some of the choices women make that maybe doesn't look so good, we also have to turn that around and look at why the men are making choices that put pressure on women to make those bad choices.
Exactly. And then after all of that talk, get up here and talk shit and wanna tear down their women in front of the world and think that's going to improve their image. And this is my dissatisfaction with their bullshit. And pardon my French, you know what I'm saying? Because this is exactly the types of issues that I talk about. So like you said, because you have this low ratio imbalance, the fact is you have more males in the environment behaving from prioritizing short-term mating strategies as opposed to long-term mating strategies. But then when we look at the single motherhood rate and the out-of-wedlock child rate and the low birth rates of black women, we'll try and pretend like it's black women, like it's emanating from black women. But I know that because of the low ratio imbalance, and you know that you can get you 7 women at one time and have your go with them. You have more of these brothers doing that than playing the long-term mating strategy. You see what I'm saying? So it's this flexion, this
and I want to add to that because I want to add to that and show. Listen, we saw this in Russia, we saw this in Estonia, we saw this in Latvia with white men behaving the exact same way. Short-term mating strategies. I mean, Belarus has got a very high percentage of single mothers. Okay, and it's because of white men behaving the same way, sex ratio environment. So this isn't specific to black men or women. So when these black guys are saying, oh, only black women do this, we got the only women, that's garbage. Okay, we see the same thing wherever these ecologies are reproduced around the world, regardless of the race, ethnic group. nationality, or whatever. This is an evolved adaptive response to ecological pressure when the sex ratios are imbalanced.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep, absolutely. And like I said, I discussed that. I discuss that all the time. So I've been on for an hour and a half. I'm not going to probably go past 2 hours. So I guess I would like to maybe see if anybody from the audience wants to come up and ask Mr. Granderson some questions. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna go ahead and drop the link, y'all. And Mr. Granderson, do you have the link for your channel so you can put it in the chat so the sisters can subscribe to your channel and check out some of your content?
Yeah, let me see. How do I write in this thing here? Because it's just c.granderson. That's my YouTube channel, and okay. I can probably put an image of my book in the avatar, I think, if you give me a second.
Okay.
But I can take questions while I'm doing that.
Right. Yes. So guys, the link is in the chat. If y'all would like to come up and ask Mrs. Granderson a question or two, now is the time to do that. I know Beige Negress had was inquiring about if there was going to be a question and answer section, stuff like that. Now, real quick, let me ask you this. That name made me think of something. How would we characterize like colorism from an evolutionary psychology perspective? Is colorism something that we just adopted and picked up from colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy, or was it something that maybe was pre-existing before that?
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I did write about colorism in right. So people tend to think, well, that came from colonialism and slavery or whatever. Anyway, because what we have is status is now associated with racial appearance. So with lighter and white-skinned people owning more wealth, more success, more prestige as a group, as societies, as nation states, and then of course Western cultural dominance has established their beauty standards as what beauty looks like. So let's say if we're not even looking at black people, if we look at parts of East Asia, the white beauty standard is so dominant out there. There are massive levels of plastic surgery taking place to change their features to make them look more like European people. So we have this along with skin color. Now, there was already in Asia, they associated lighter skin color with being more wealthy and more prestigious because they were indoors, and the darker people were the ones who worked outdoors, and the outdoor occupations were of a lower social rank. So what they started to do was associate darker skin with poverty, with poorer jobs, with less wealth, and so forth. And now with the dominance of Western culture and their standards and success and prestige and so on, because we all want a higher status, and the highest status we see in the world is lighter, white-skinned people. So now that those two go together, the lighter skin goes along with a higher social rank. And of course, you had that would have been established in the slave societies and through colonialism. But even if they did not happen, as long as the West has the level of power and dominance that it has, human beings have this psychology we call success, prestige, and status. And if success and prestige are associated with lighter skin, with the European phenotype, then our psychology, that is what higher ranked people look like. And everyone wants a higher social status. So those two will go together, first because of our native psychology to look for where success and prestige exist, identify it, and then try to acquire that ourselves. So if that success is associated with the light and white skin appearance, that's how you get, the comb test and the paper bag test and people bleaching and things like that. We've seen this through the past several hundreds of years, and this is global now. Right. This is not just amongst black people; it's amongst any dark-skinned population, because we see it in Asia as well.
Right.
Okay, so I have Renaissance Man and the Faith Factor up. So Renaissance Man, you was up first. So you can go ahead and ask Mr. Grandison your question.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me come up, Amiri. Yeah, I caught the tail end of this, so he may have sort of kind of alluded this already, but I wanted to ask, when you look at the current state of Black America, and you look at, I know you all discuss things like the gender imbalance, as well as different mating strategies, all of those things. If we wanted to turn those, or if we wanted to turn basically Black America around and make it competitive, what, in your opinion, is the most imperative thing that would have to change to make it competitive with, I guess, with the most elite societies, I guess, in the world?
Well, that's easy and it's hard. So earlier in the conversation, Amiri was talking about, educating ourselves and so on. I said, this has to happen from a young age. So the first thing I would think you need to do is take control of how you educate yourself. And from a young age, it's actually critical. We are in the most sensitive cultural learning period for the first 2 decades of life. So you may have noticed how quickly children learn language and accent and body language and all these things that become very difficult as you get older. So I always use this example. Arnold Schwarzenegger moved to America in 1969, over 50 years ago, and he still doesn't sound American. But if you move to America and you're 7 or 8 years old, within a couple of years, you already sound like an American. This is our cultural learning capacities are so strong and sensitive at a young age. And we learn a lot of culture automatically and unconsciously. So what you want to do is you want to surround Black children with a lot of the cultural learning that will take place through observation and inference. Because right now they are seeing Black inferiority. And you can do something about that. You can create your cultural circumstances for your community, but we have to do it scientifically and consciously because you're a minority amongst the dominant population. So because their mainstream culture is what's dominant, a lot of that is being learned automatically and unconsciously. And that's really displayed when you look at the black doll, white doll test, where you can see 4, 5, 6-year-old Black children telling you how bad the black doll is or the Black child, and that the white doll is so good and so on. This is automatic cultural learning from what's around them. And it's not just from media, because remember, this test was done before televisions were in people's homes. So they were learning this just from the community, just from looking at other human beings. So we have to look at the ways we learn culture and design a framework that from one domain to another, whether it's attractiveness standards, whether it's economics, whether it's history, whether it's the social norms that we practice towards each other. Now, I'm not talking about how to perceive white people and others. How are Black people perceiving themselves? Now, here's something that tends to happen when I speak to African Americans and they don't like it. But look, the truth is the truth. If you've been in a white supremacist nation state for 400 years, you've been having white supremacist culture imposed and internalized upon you for those 400 years. You can't take that out in one generation because of what happened in the 60s. And this really hasn't been addressed. There is so much maladaptive and dysfunctional culture that has been internalized by African Americans, but not by choice. If you live in the most powerful country, remember, America's had the biggest economy since 1870. So the African American population has lived in the most powerful white supremacist society for the past 400 years. So there's a lot of bad culture in there in terms of how we define ourselves racially, how we perceive ourselves. That culture has to be cleaned out. This is something Amos Wilson would talk about, and many other African American scholars. It's not like they don't know this. It's just the saying you need a delivery system to get the majority of your culture perceiving themselves positively, sweeping out the maladaptive, dysfunctional cultural practices. I mean, as Black men, we can't be placing lighter skinned or white women or whatever on some type of higher pedestal or platform than our own women. White men don't do that. That's a very bad practice to do, because then you're broadcasting to other cultures. We think less of ourselves and we think you are better. And we are competing against each other. So if you're competing against my team and I'm telling you your team is better than mine, and I'm telling my own team our team is not as good as theirs, we cannot compete against that team because we are telling them they are better and we are telling our own team we are not as good. So from a psychological point of view, with regard to cooperative and collective action as a group, you cannot have the right type of coalitional psychology to compete well as a subgroup in a nation of other subgroups who have a different cultural history, where they don't have all this internalized anti-blackness culture. So we have to deal with that within ourselves. And there's a lot of that. It's not just African Americans, of course. We see this in the Caribbean, throughout Brazil, and so on. Any population that is the descendants of enslaved Africans, there is a significant level of dysfunctional culture there. And without addressing that, you cannot be as successful as you want to be against other groups that don't have that same high level of dysfunctional culture.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and see, this
yeah,
is
yeah.
Real quick, Renaissance man, and that's why y'all hear this. This is why you all will hear me talk about internalized whiteness. And that's exactly what's happening. We internalize it and then we deploy it against one another. Go ahead, Renaissance man.
No, I was just gonna say no. That's very insightful because I remember a big thing in the '60s, especially with Malcolm X. He would always talk about the images and what people internalized, what they were looking at, and the importance of that and emphasizing it. But then I also see other cultures how they'll have like cultural schools, like Jewish families will send their kids to like a Saturday school or something like that, to sort of reinforce that culture as well. And I know you're pointing out like even people in the Caribbean, but that's even one thing I've noticed is that I remember listening to I believe it wasn't Shirley Franklin, it was I can't remember her name now. Very big black female politician in the '60s.
Shirley
Wait, say again?
Chisholm.
Yes, Shirley Chisholm. She talked about going to the Caribbean and how basically living and being in that culture helped her at a very young age to appreciate and really reaffirm her blackness and love of self and all those things. So what Dr. Grandison is saying is really resonating with just what I've heard. And even the part about age, I've heard that basically I think it's by like age 6, children's social skills are pretty much set for the most part. So just how much development that goes on in those first infant years that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And how, like I said, you were saying it doesn't even have to be television. I was reading a study, they pointed out the fact that if you even look at if you have an integrated environment and you have black children and white children, it can be something as simple as, when a white child does something well, a teacher will walk over to them, pat them on the back or pat them on the head, whatever, as a form of affirmation. And if a black child does that same thing, they may just say, hey, good job from across the room. And all these things are learned. So, no, I thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer.
Okay, so I want to get to the Faith Factor. How you doing, Faith?
Hi, I'm Mary. Thank you so much for having me up. Hi, Chaos, and very good stream last night, Chaos, by the way. I enjoyed myself. I do have a question for the doctor, but I do want to first make a statement. The doctor said something earlier, and it kind of puts something in perspective for me as far as a stereotype about the buck, in slavery, the black man being the buck. And it was in reference to what he was talking about as far as the black male being the person that breeds on the plantation. See, in our minds, the picture that was painted, at least for me, was that black men were just, giving women and, and all they had to do after a long day's work was just satisfy their quota, and they were just giving these women. But you said something earlier that kind of put it in a different perspective for me, because you were stating that basically on the plantation, reproductivity was basically something that they controlled on the plantation. And I'm thinking that it was controlled probably because they saw us like cattle, like chattel. So, if you look at it in that perspective, they couldn't just let the black man breed on the plantation willy-nilly. They had to control it. So most black men, like you said, probably weren't having sex on the level that, we were told or we were made to think that they were having sex. Only certain black men got to be breeders and others did not get to breed at all. They had to have permission, like you said. So I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for putting that into perspective. And finally, my question is, because you
Yeah,
talked a lot about, oh, no problem. You talked a lot about Black people needing to have some sort of standard or boundary. And so I also feel as if, a lot of the disrespect and disdain that we have for one another comes from the fact that a lot of us are feeling disrespected in our communication. Black men, as soon as they get angry with a Black woman, like I was just somewhere the other evening, and Black men were disrespecting Black women on the panel left and right, calling them the B word, calling them the H word. It's just a total lack of communication of respect towards one another. So I was wondering, what sort of set standards and values should we have, just so we can have that basic respect for one another?
right. So what you're talking about there is anti-blackness culture, right? So I would define that as, knowledge, preferences, beliefs, values, attitudes around race that are associated with the Black race that we acquire from other human beings from social learning and cultural transmission. And as I said earlier, a lot of this is happening in childhood. So these cultural beliefs are behavior shaping information that most powerfully influence how Black people perceive themselves, how they interact with each other, and then that shapes how other races interact with Black people. But the primary is what you just mentioned. How are we using it in terms of how Black people interact and perceive each other? Because this is the major weakness. We have to care a lot less about how the other races feel about us. We have to care a lot more about how we feel about ourselves. So we have to deal with the anti-Blackness culture that is within us, because once you clean that out, then you've got a strong people who are using positive culture towards each other, and it makes you much more powerful in terms of defending yourself from the external groups. So when we want to talk about, let's say, white supremacy and these other things, that is not the primary concern. You have to be a strong team first to be able to deal with the outside external factors, the other teams. So if we are looking at ourselves in this negative psychological cultural way, this actually affects performance. It affects our belief in our intellectual and cognitive and cultural abilities to do well. So that is a weakened team. So I always put it in a competitive context, because what you're saying is so important. If we are so willing to devalue ourselves, whether it's to devalue ourselves as Black people, to devalue Black women, to devalue Black men, that is a severely weakened team. They will not act be in their own interest.
Real quick, Miss.
Yeah.
Real quick, Mr. Grandison, also the devaluation of Black children, and this is why for me the conversations that's had by many of these so-called men who want to stylize themselves as leaders, and the distinction I make between my thinking and their thinking is that because I value myself so much and I value my community and my race so much, that I can never see any child that came from my loins or that even comes from my community as somehow being a burden or a drag on my life or my community. But this is something that we hear being peddled by many of these men, and I use that term loosely. To me, that's an anathema. That's not manhood.
Exactly, Amiri. I hear so many Black men talk about
So
Black children with disdain. I mean,
Exactly.
even the whole baby mama culture mantra, they're sitting here and they're downing the women that have to raise the children and putting the women in a bad mental space about even their own motherhood. So, I've never seen this in any other culture but ours. I mean, other cultures have their baby mamas, but they're not dragging the people that have to raise the children.
Right. And what you see, in fact, is you see, I mean, look, we just saw this with the repeal of Roe v. Wade. We know that this is something that was coming, because in the 80s, one of the advisors to the Reagan administration wrote a book called The Birth Dearth, and that birth dearth was speaking specifically about the fertility rates of the white community. And so it's a reason why they're a majority. That them being a majority and us being a minority, that's all about numbers. Now, am I saying just go out there and make babies? Like, I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that we have to place value on our progeny, irrespective of how the progeny gets here. And this is why you see the government, the ethno state, putting things in place to artificially prop that up, because any children are better than no children. Any children are better than no children. You see, and this is why for governments and communities and peoples, the fertility rates matter. And then when you have a black men who have been going around for the last 10 years on social media, speaking very negatively about women being fertile, their own women being fertile, and talking about the offspring in a negative way, then what do you think you're incentivizing your women to do? You're incentivizing them to reproduce less, which just keeps you in a position where you're going to continue to be a minority. And now it's so bad, in fact, that we are no longer even the major minority group in this country, but they want to lead so bad. All right, go ahead and finish saying. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Mr. Grandison. Then I want to get to Beige Negress. Then we got What in the World, and Chaos is back on the panel.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish up with the question Faith Factor said, because what she's talking about is a lack of what we would call pro-social behavior. So this is when a group acts very positively, supportively towards themselves in competition with other groups. And we have a low level of pro-social behavior towards each other in many different domains. So of course, we can talk about in terms of our standards of attractiveness, but we can say the same thing economically. This is what Amos Wilson was talking about when we're talking about, buying from Black and things like that. That's called pro-social behavior. And there's a lot of science behind it, a lot of game theory behind it. Anyone tells you that we shouldn't be doing that it's just about being Americans or whatever, that's a damn lie, because the other groups are most definitely doing that. And I put several examples of it in my book. So a lot of these things we're asking, I put a lot of the science in the book. So if you want the long, detailed explanation with the sources and the scientific evidence that supports what I'm saying, you can get the book. And I'll always come back and talk when Amiri invites me. But that's an excellent question. And it is the heart of the problem is how we act towards each other. We can win any other fight, but we've got to be pro-social towards each other if we want to win the other battles against any other group.
Absolutely. Okay, so well, let me get to Beige Negress, Chaos, because she's been waiting. Beige Negress. Okay. Beige Negress, how you?
Hi, thank you. I have to get back to work. Thank you for this discussion. I did not come here today intending to broach this topic when I made the decision to attend this discussion, but something Dr. Grandison said in his presentation inspired this question. The question has to do with Black femicide in the United States. And let's be clear, femicide is a worldwide issue. It's happening in Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and in first world countries. And I'm not here to debate whether or not Black femicide or convince anybody whether or not Black femicide in the United States is real. I'm not interested in convincing anybody or interacting to convince anybody. My question that was inspired by Dr. Grandison was, he was saying that I think something like men with like low status or low social currency, low resources have a higher propensity for violence than men who have more resources and prestige, because the men with resources and prestige really do have something to lose. So my question related to Black femicide is that the only common denominator with the majority of men that are killing Black women, 4 to 5 Black women or girls are being killed a day. In the United States, the only common denominator is that the majority of them are Black men. it's Black men from two-parent families, Black men from white-collar families, poor Black men who already have a history of violence or have police records, high-status Black men who are executive vice presidents of banks. Um, the only common denominator is that they're Black men. You cannot reduce it to any specific economic group or sociological group. Can you, with your knowledge and education, can you offer any type of explanation why Black men who seemingly have something to lose are murdering Black women and girls also? Thank you.
Well, I would say that's a problem with men in general. You will see in terms of variation and percentage difference, let's say by the economic status of the male. When you look at this at the societal level, and we look at violence towards women, domestic violence is, the second most common form of violence on earth. Number one is status conflicts with men, and in both of those categories, you will find it at the lower levels of the society. The men at the bottom of the societies are going to commit the most. But yes, you're correct. You will see it amongst middle and upper class men. You will see it in terms of men in other domains and so forth. But there will be a difference in intensity level with regard to the social rank of the male, or it depends what you're talking about now. Because if it's somewhere like, let's say, Afghanistan or something, you're talking about a lot of cultural reinforcement of that type of behavior. Based on the social norms in that society. So you can have multiple factors that will cause that, in terms of men trying to control their women through physical aggression, violence, and ultimately homicide. Let's say if a man feels he's being perceived as weak because he can't control his woman or something like that, they can tend to want to broadcast that they are in control by killing a woman or beating a woman or something like that. Now, this is a problem of males in the Homo sapien species to a certain degree. Now, in terms of, well, how do you reduce that? First of all, you got to have costs and consequences. So you need excellent law enforcement. You need excellent policy design. But also you want to reduce the levels of inequality in that society. And then if there are cultural issues that seem to reinforce that, hey, you should deal with your woman this way, if she's not behaving in a way that your society or culture deems you as being weak, if you can't get your woman to behave that way, then those social norms have to be addressed as well. And you can change social norms, but it is a multifactorial problem. And let's be clear, violence against women, like I said, this is one of the two forms of the most common forms of violence human beings commit on planet Earth. It's not necessarily a racial problem. It's a male-female problem. It's a problem of male sexual psychology in a way, and it can be reinforced culturally. But there are many ways to attack it. But you really do have to work hard as a society to deal with that. And like I said, you have to start off right off the bat with significant law enforcement and criminal justice. People understand costs and consequences. So when there's a really high cost placed on a bad behavior, you're less likely to see that behavior. So you got to work hard there, but you got to work hard culturally, and then you have to work hard ecologically. We can't have massive levels of unemployment amongst young Black men and then think there isn't going to be violence against women or violence against men, because as much as they're committing violence against women, Black men are killing other Black men at a very high rate. And there are similar causes for both of those forms of violence. That's why they're the two most common forms: status conflicts and intimate partner violence. They're right next to each other, but it's actually more men committing violence against other men is more than women. And I understand what you're saying.
Doctor, I am aware that Black men kill more Black men than anybody in the country. But I just don't understand why a Black man who is a career military man, or somebody from a two-parent advantageous white-collar home, or somebody who has a high position in corporate America, why are they doing what Pookie does, who reads at the third grade level and has a rap sheet? That's what I don't understand.
Well, as I said, it is part of male sexual psychology to want to control women to some degree, to want to control your partner. So that's why I said it can happen across any class, any type of identity, it can happen across the board, but you will absolutely see a difference in terms of the intensity level, the percentage of it. It's going to be far more amongst working class men than it is, let's say, your high class guy who's done well for himself. He would have done it, but if you look at the numbers, you're clearly going to see it's very different. But just because he's a high class man, it doesn't mean he's not a man or not vulnerable to male sexual psychology in some social context. So you're still going to have men try to do that. We see millionaires who can be very violent against a woman or their wife or things like that. So this is an issue with regard to male psychology, and you have to work harder in terms of your societal development to deal with that. This is when we started this broadcast, I talked about how men and women evolved hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, and that those behaviors that worked very well back then, and they would have worked, they don't work now in the modern world. It's what we call an evolutionary mismatch. But because the brain evolved for the society we're in for 2 million years, which was the Stone Age, we still get a lot of those behaviors today across the board in many, many different areas. And unfortunately, it will be in terms of physical aggression against women also.
Yeah, now real quick, I want to jump in there because, and I was actually having this discussion with supposed, I ain't gonna say supposed, with a PhD a few nights ago, and this is what I was talking about with the intimate partner violence numbers, and this is why if sisters listen to me, I never personalize these issues when we're talking about femicide, so I'll never try and invalidate the very lived experiences of Black women, and you can just go look at the statistics, and this is what Mr. Grandison is talking about, and this is the point that I was making the other night when I was on that panel with the PhD, is that just because of patriarchy and because of the how did you say it, the psychosexual sexual psychology of men, it's just been this thing where it's been seen as acceptable because of patriarchy, where one sex has been able to use violence as a means to control the other part of the sex. You see what I'm saying? So when we have these conversations, what some men and some brothers would tend to do is try and make it seem like it's some comparative or equal thing, when we just know that it's not. So they'll say, well, the statistics show that women initiate most of the intimate partner violence, but you have to drill down on that word initiate. What does the word initiate mean? Speaking of what Mr. Grandison was saying, so if this man believes it's his right to control this woman, and she say, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to do that, and he feel like he needs to control her, then it causes a conflict, and now it's violence. Then you'll be like, well, she initiated it, but what do you mean initiate? See, when they say that word, they're making it seem that as if these women are inherently being aggressive, when we know just from the evolutionary psychology, patriarchy, and these things, these cultural reinforcers, that's never been the case. It's never been this thing where women are the aggressors, not by and large. So I just wanted to jump in on that. You have anything else you wanted to ask them, Beige Negress?
Is she there?
Is she there? Are you there, Beige Negress? Well, she's muted. Maybe she said she was at work, I think. So well, Chaos, did you want to go? Because we have What in the World on the panel as well.
Okay, let me give a brief 'cause I know someone contributed again. Thank you, Juju, for your contribution, your $9.99 contribution. I appreciate it. Mr. Grandson, if you're in the private chat, can you please put the link to your YouTube channel if possible? I'll pin it. That'd be easier. You there, Mr. Grandson? Oh, all right. Well.
Yeah, I'm here.
We have a private chat. Just send the link to the private chat, and I'll pin it in the chat.
How do you write in the chat?
Are you your phone or your computer?
Hey, you know what? You know what?
Okay.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Okay. All right. Moving on. What in the world? What in the world? What is your question for Christopher Grandison?
Hi, everybody. How are you guys doing first?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Faith, for the for come by. Just want to remind you.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. How you? It's been a while. Minute. What in the world? How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm just taking some time off, needed time off from social media a little bit, like reducing the time that I have on social media. But I actually wanted to make a commentary about the discussion that was going on. 2 points I want to make about the question that lady before me had. Um, so my, and maybe like the I can get a feedback on this, but for me, a lot of times the reason why men at lower socioeconomic standing are more inclined to engage in physical violence or to be more violent. The way I see it, and I'm not a scholar or anything, but it's human to a certain degree. It's human nature, more so for men, to seek power and control in whatever area that you're engaged in. It's normal, or it's an instinct to seek some level of control and power. People or men that are in higher socioeconomic status, they have other ways of exerting that control or manifesting that control. And so they don't have to engage in physical control or physical power dominance as much. So when you have low socioeconomic standing, the power that you have rests in your physical capability, and that's where you go. That's how you try to exert power. Hence why people in lower socioeconomic would be more violent or more prone to violence than at least that's my perception of things to a certain degree. Not to say that people that are in higher social standing do not engage in that. They do, but the degree is different. But the other thing I wanted to comment in the earlier discussion, and maybe there might be a question on that, when it comes to respect in communication amongst each other, setting boundaries, for me and my personal experience, a lot of times people think respecting others is something they do for others. And I disagree with that. Respect is something you do for you. When you respect others, you're effectively carrying yourself in a way you want to be treated. That is your way of telling people what your boundaries are. So if you respect somebody, you're not doing them a favor. You're not doing them to make them happy. It does make people happy when you respect them. It does put you in a good standing when you respect other people. But the benefit is to you because you're setting the tone of how you want to communicate with them. And it's very important to have that self boundary that says, I am not going to tolerate these things that are not respectful towards me. That's just my personal observation and how I personally operate. But a lot of times when I talk to people, they think respecting others or carrying yourself in a respectable way towards others when you're communicating is something you do for others. And I don't think that is the case. And I would like to hear Doctor's opinion on that based on the research that he's done in his study. And when it comes to culture, culture is something, it's not something that just happens. It's not something that people go design and implement. It's not a program. It's not a social program. It's something that comes from everyday practice. So a lot of times people talk about the culture without really pinpointing the fact that what every single person does today impacts culture. So is it to say that, are we just talking about culture and not actually doing the work that's done to change the culture? And what are the necessary steps to get to that, to get people to act today? Because if you talk to, majority of the people that even you disagree with, when you talk to them fundamentally about what's wrong with the culture and what needs to change, there's a lot of fundamentally, similarities in what we say and what they say. Like there's a lot of commonality in what people want to see in society. The difference comes in what they do today to get there. And what do we do to get people to change today?
Mr. Grandison, your
Thank
thoughts
you.
on? Yeah, we appreciate that. That wasn't where I always like the way you communicate. You're always very articulate and calm, and you can I can tell you're someone who thinks before she speaks, and that's a great trait. Mr. Grandison, did you want to address what she was talking about?
Yeah, I'd love to address what she's talking about. That is just an excellent, outstanding, and a profound question. It's why in my book I put anti-blackness culture on the subtitle first, ahead of racism, because there's two parts to what she said. So she's correct in a lot of us understand we need cultural change. There are cultural problems, and how do you change the culture? Now, the first thing you have to look at, what you really have to get right, is how do human beings learn culture? Because if you don't get that part right, you can write brilliant books, you can go on TV, you can have great messages, you can put stuff in school. But if you don't understand the powerful ways that human beings learn culture, then you're probably putting the culture you want people to learn in the wrong place. So this is basically a wrong diagnosis, wrong cure kind of thing. So I study this science called cultural evolution, and it's all about humans beings being an obligate cultural species, and it details the many different ways in how human beings learn culture. So let me give an example. We can say how we've mentioned Amos Wilson several times tonight, how brilliant this African-American psychologist was, the information he provided, the books he wrote. And yet our young people can tell you everything about Kanye West or Kim Kardashian, and very few of them have even heard of Amos Wilson. While Amos Wilson has the cultural learning that we need, and Kanye West doesn't have that. But Kanye West puts the culture where the young people can learn it. So does Kim Kardashian. See, this we learn in a very social way. Like school is formal and it's important, but a whole lot of culture is just learned from interacting with other human beings, observation and inference. We have success, conformity, prestige, status psychologies, and we learn a whole lot of culture that way without even thinking about it. This is why children can learn so much where they didn't ask for it. We didn't sit them down and teach it, and yet they know it. So this is about how do human beings learn culture. So when we get a whole lot better at that, and a whole lot of this is already known, and I put a lot of this in my book in ways we can do that. This is where you now identify where to put the culture so it can get into our young people, and then they can move forward with our generations, and we can get people to do the right thing without even trying. You want good culture to be in your social norms, because human beings are automatic social norm followers. So if you can place the good culture that we want and get the bad culture out and put it in our social norms and make sure that our young people can access it really early in life. This means the adults have to practice it so children can observe, can infer, can defer to it, can acquire it without even trying, because we see children gaining a whole lot of that without trying. This is kind of where you have to put it. Now, you do need formal structural changes in terms of our framework, so we do have to take control of our education, but you're going to have to take control of popular culture too. This means we can't have the nonsense that goes on in hip hop and then think there's not a whole lot of dysfunctional culture being broadcast by hip hop. There's a ton of bad culture being broadcast by hip hop, and it is so attractive that we can pick it up and learn it again without even trying. So when we get the cultural learning mechanisms right, that's when we know, okay, you put the right culture here, we're going to learn it really quickly, we're going to practice it automatically, and we can transform our population by doing it that way. When we look at some other cultures enviously, let's say some immigrant group or something, it's because their good culture is based in their social norms. The children are learning it without even trying. When you talk, let's say, about Chinese immigrants, or we may talk about what some Jewish people do, the good culture is grounded in their social norms. And then it leads to other forms of behavior in what we talked about when I responded to Faith Factor's question about pro-social behavior towards each other. Many groups teach that automatically at a young age. But because we have so much cultural damage from these past several hundred years in the West, there's been a lot of bad cultural damage on our populations. So that is a disadvantage we have, an advantage some other groups have is that the good culture is right there in their home, in their community, grounded in the social norms and cultural history of that group. But of course, we've had our culture stripped, and we've had a whole lot of toxic stuff put in there that we didn't create, that imposed it upon us, so we would act in their interests and against our own. So we have to be conscious and direct about how we get that bad culture out, bring the positive culture in, and it starts with how do human beings learn culture? And there's a lot of that science in existence today. But I always emphasize this. If we are not going to be scientific about how we deal with our cultural problems, we are going to continue to be at the back. It's the 21st century, and corporations and governments are using the same science I'm talking to you about to get people to do what they want or to become billionaires. And some communities can do this automatically, but they're going to be conscious about how they do it too. And if we are not conscious about how we put the right culture in the right places, that we can learn it at a young age and then act it out, we've got a whole lot of hurt coming our way. We thought we were getting away from that bad hurt, but this world's about to get a whole lot more competitive because of the high levels of inequality that are coming our way. With more inequality, you get more intense competition and fighting between groups. We're already in a bad position. Nobody values us. So we're going to be really in a bad position if we don't get our act together. We got to be scientific about how we build this cultural framework that everything else is going to spring from. So excellent question. I think your name is what in the world? That's a beautiful question.
Are you there, sis?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was really helpful. And it affirms. A lot of times when I hear conversations, I question myself to see, if I'm the only one standing out, or if my logic makes sense. So thank you for your response. That's really helpful. Thank you, Amiri.
All right, no doubt. Well, I appreciate you. Appreciate you tuning in and participating. And like I said, you always add value to any topic we're discussing. So Chaos, do you have anything?
Yes.
You just put the link in the chat. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I put the link for at least one person to come up or whatever. Y'all guys got 7 minutes to ask. If y'all want to come up, ask your questions now. That's why I put the link one more time. Mr. Grandson, I heard partial of the people that travel abroad to, I guess, find a mate or whatever. My question, because I know the West now, and people forgot we're in a globalized system now for decades now, and I got this information besides hearing from other countries. I knew this for a while now before I even knew about YouTube. My biggest question is, for those that I guess are trying to seek love, are they really doing it in good faith, or they just really want to, I guess, what's the word, soil the royal oats and play around to a point where, now they wait till they reach a certain age, now they want to, I guess, settle down. Is that the right way to go for majority of our people? And this question applies to both genders, not just one.
Now, are you talking about the people who go overseas to look for their
partners?
Like
some people, they said they don't travel, even to some notion said they look into, I guess they said, want to find love, mostly, not just mate, but to find love, mostly.
Okay, so, well, the traveling overseas, obviously, if it enhances their attractiveness, which creates a greater pool of mates to potentially choose from. Now, some people are definitely, looking for love. They may struggle in the environment where they're in. If you're, let's say, in the United States, it's more competitive, right? So, because other people will be on your level in terms of attractiveness, whether that's socially, economically, maybe even physically, because of nutrition and healthcare while you're growing up. This helps you look more attractive. So if you're in a really poor country and your diet isn't good and the healthcare has been bad, that can harm your attractiveness as well. Now, so going from these big, powerful economies to some of these others, I think you're going to have a lot of variation. There are going to be people who are just looking for a partner, and they've increased the probability they can attract a partner by putting themselves in a mating market where they are now on a higher level. So, and that would apply for men and women, because I see women doing this too. Like when, you know, I spent time in Jamaica, you know, Western women would come to Jamaica and they would, you know, hook up with the Jamaican men and sometimes fall in love and marry them and bring them to the United Kingdom or America or whatever. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But in doing that, in going to, you know, the smaller economies, they then increase their attractiveness. There's a much bigger mating pool and they can call the shots a bit more. Some are definitely looking for love. Others, yeah, they're looking for just, you know, short-term sexual strategies. And that applies for men and women as well. I see women who, let's say, go to Morocco, go to Kenya, go to Jamaica, and they're hooking up with a lot of the young guys there. This tends to be maybe more middle-aged women, but I see that both ways. It's just a way that a human being can enhance their attractiveness in a way that they can't, because let's say in America or the United Kingdom or wherever, they're in a more competitive context. So they want to go where they're higher up in the attractiveness power hierarchy, so to speak. And that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So you think that should we implement as a people, like how other culture groups, let's say I heard even with the Jewish people, even with the boys particularly, but in general, that they prioritize that there should be a time frame where you should start settling down, and it should be this time frame. If not, there should be a sense of punishment, like a banishment or whatever, to ostracize to those that don't follow the rules. In regards, we set a parameter and standard that you have to meet, you have to be at this point in time. If not, then I had to install this for the protection of the whole group. You think we as black people should start in time start implement this for ourselves, no matter where we are?
I don't know if it's a good idea to do it, but I know it wouldn't work because of the focus on individualism now in Western society. Getting involved in terms of when you must do this or that in terms of your mate selection, in terms of consciously and directly telling that to adults, I don't think that can work. Now, what could work is if you're working with really young people.
That's what I'm saying. Young people. This question. I can't worry about people over the age of, let's say, 23 or above. Maybe some around, but once you pass adult age, or you start your in that process, is you're already far gone because this should have been implemented. I'm talking about the ones that's going to come now. That's young.
Right. So my approach to this would be in terms of socially, in popular culture, and in formal education. You just want to broadcast the benefits of the long-term mating strategy, all the benefits and advantages of it, how good it is for you as an individual, how good it is for men and women, and how good it is for your community. And if you have, let's say, the right people broadcasting it. So let's say a Kanye West or, you know, all the really popular figures in our society, if they were modeling that, then the young people would pick it up right away, because we are automatically going to pick up a whole lot of behavior patterns from the successful, prestigious people. And once you've done that, then you get conformity psychology acting as well. So now that we're deferring and imitating the successful and prestigious, and you're seeing more of that trickle down to the lower level, now you've got three forms of psychology acting together. You got your success psychology, your prestige psychology, and you got conformity psychology. And this is how you can get millions of people to kind of follow a pattern and do the same thing. Like I've got an example on my YouTube channel where China were eating a whole lot of shark fin soup every year. So they were killing like 60, 70 million sharks. And they had the famous successful people now start advertising, hey, stop eating the shark fin soup. It's really bad. So all their big sports stars and their big business stars and tech, they had those people do it. And in less than a decade, they had like cut down all the shark fin soup by about 80, 90%. Now, you know how big China's population is. We're talking about 1 billion people. So they got hundreds of millions of people to stop eating shark fin soup in about 7 years. And that's by using the success prestige psychology in terms of how to transmit a new cultural behavior. And that speaks to the last question we got from What in the World. They put the cultural learning into the models, the famous people and successful models. And it changed everything in 7 years. Now we can do that too. So with your question, what you'd want to do is you want to take the people that we look at a lot who look like us. So these top class people within the Black community who we pay a lot of attention to, particularly young people, you want those people to model that behavior. And anyone else who's got, let's say, important other forms of success, if you can attach it to that model of success, whatever it is, you can turn behavior around very, very quickly. And yeah, you'd want to do that through young people. So you can do it that way through modeling. I don't think you could do it directly because there'd be too many people, even within our own community, because they've bought in too much to this thing about individualism, and that keeps them away from thinking about how they have to act in the interest of the tribe. So there's a whole lot of Black people who'd want to fight that down. But if you can put it in the right cultural place, yeah, you can do that.
Amiri,
can I add something here?
Wait, hold on. In layman's terms, we are fucked because most of our slaves are already bought off to really implement that. Because they look for the most. Go ahead.
Can I add something?
And I also have a question as well when she's done.
Go ahead.
Okay, so considering what the conversation that happened about the effect of that early childhood learning and how that shapes people, I would even go further, not just the childhood, but like the pubescent age, the teenage age. I want to make sure that we're not forgetting the impact of the environment children grow up in and how they're shaped. I'm a firm believer, and this is something that I've gained from my personal life as well as from within my community. I'm an Ethiopian living in the U.S. Something that I gained in my community, the parents' impact, the impact of seeing a successful family, a relationship between a mother and a father, and economic prosperity that comes from that intact unit working together has a significant impact on how a child is shaped, what they envision and what they aspire to be. If we this goes to the one of the elements that that I'm sorry, I'm trying to say your name, but I can't see your name. The author talked about
Chris Grandison.
Chris, yeah. So Mr. Grandison talked about the vision that you set for your child, the vision that you set for the new generation is greatly impacted on what they see in their home, what they see in their family. And people might have a strong opinion about this, but I'm a big believer that a certain generation has to sacrifice their desires to course correct, to provide that something to aspire to a positive way. We have to get rid of this individualism, and people have to realize you have to sacrifice your generation, your desires to a certain degree to provide that vision of a strong home, a strong family, a strong relationship, and economic prosperity that comes from it. I mean, people might have a strong opinion about this, but that's my position. I'm interested to hear, commentary about that.
Mr. Grandison, you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that. So she's correct. She's talking about the modeling that children will see with, let's say, a strong two-parent family, and then let's say they're successful in other areas as well in terms of how they work together and then their careers and things like that. I mean, one of the things I would love to change or advise for our community is just getting married, let's say mid-20s, and just be very committed and loyal to that marriage. So obviously you want to make a good choice because we don't want divorces and things like that. But if we could have a lot more of, marriage at an early age, and then those two young people working together, becoming parents, creating good family units, this is how you get, a strong community. Now, of course, a lot of that rests on a cultural foundation. I think that's partly what in the world was speaking of in talking about her cultural heritage and background, things that she observed in her society. And that relates to what Chaos Reign was also talking about, that if we want to have these changes, as you see, I'm going again and again back to the same place. it starts on a cultural foundation. Because if you want to get a large population of people acting in a very pro-social manner towards themselves with these good outcomes at the community, at the population level, not just some individuals doing well for themselves, but a group doing well and being able to protect their community, you want to tie that together with these behaviors that are taught from a young age, and a lot of it just needs to be automatic and unconscious. When we look at well-functioning societies, it's usually based on the package of social norms that plays a role in the institutions that they build. So even when you see a society with good functioning, positive, strong institutions, you're still talking about the cultural psychology and the social norms of the people who built those institutions. That's what leads to the stable institutions that operate well for them. So over and over again, we're going to come back to the same place. We want hundreds of thousands, millions of people acting positively, building a strong community. It rests on a cultural foundation. So we've got to broadcast the right stuff for the young people to learn the right stuff. And that means we learn a bit more about how we actually learn culture in the first place. But we do need more investigation into what the good cultural practices are, because we're in a modern world now and some of these things have to change. And of course, we need a lot of scientific investigation into the causes and roots of some of the maladaptive cultural practices that we have. We know a lot of them, but there's a lot more out there that simply haven't been investigated, or at least within a Black community context, haven't been investigated to the depth they need to be investigated for us to now get the right diagnosis and get the right cure. But it's critical that we do that, because I'll finish on this point again. We are in a group competitive context. So the more bad culture you have, the worse you're going to do in intergroup competition. And if anyone tells you you're not in competition, stop listening to them. They are lying to you. When you look at all these statistics in your society, you're going to see them break down culturally, ethnically, and racially. That's intergroup competition. If one group has, 90% of their children graduating from high school, and another group, it's like 10%, that's intergroup competition. The group with the children graduating, 90% of their children, they're winning. They are going to get the better educations. They are going to get the better jobs. They are going to get the better socioeconomic outcomes, the better healthcare, live in better environments, and have more stable environments for their children. So there's multiple forms of competition going on. So if you don't get your cultural practices right, your social norms, the package you're operating right, you're going to, again, be in a whole lot of hurt, because there's a whole lot of tough circumstances coming our way at the societal level, and we have to be operating with a competitive advantage. Right now, we are operating with a disadvantage because of the bad cultural practices that are there. A lot of them, we didn't put them there, but they're in us now, and it's our responsibility to get them out.
Right now, real quick, I want to look at Carlton Banks here, and this is the problem that I have with how these men present these arguments. So he's saying, strong and independent, don't need no man, don't sound like they worried about a gender imbalance. Well, they'll talk about this mantra of what we attribute to Black women, and honestly, what Black women have a champion. But the point that I make is, we act as if that happened and it was just somehow one-sided. At the same time, while you had this message of being strong and independent, don't need a man, let's not act like you didn't have a message being peddled to brothers about being rugged individualism. You see what I'm saying? They always, and this is the problem I have with their arguments, it's always about the woman. It's never about them. Like, they just been so family and community oriented. This is what we talked about when we opened up this thing. We're talking about the low gender ratio in that type of environment, the type of mating strategies that the men will prioritize. And so what that was saying is, the type of mating strategies that these men prioritize, it's going to create this type of sentiment right here. So we have to look at it. Okay, so why did so many sisters sign up to be strong and independent? Why? It's what Mr. Gradison has been laying out this entire discussion. Because of the low gender ratio imbalance, The woman's like, well, I don't have a net, so I gotta be strong and independent because I know I can't depend on no man. I'm in an environment where I outnumber my man. You see what I'm saying? So they don't want to be honest. Then I want to go up to here to this too, because it was just like what Mr. Grandison was saying, because you have individuals on these platforms talking about you need to get married when you're 60 years old. You just settle down and get married. Talking that dumb shit. But look at Edgemere. She said if most black men wanted to be better, then Amiri should have been had 1 million black male subscribers and a view count that matches that subscriber base per video, and not males in the manosphere. While they sit up there and listen to a white woman named just Pearly Things. I'm literally sitting as a walking, talking, breathing example of what's possible and what can be done, but they think they're gonna shame me. I'm the simp and I'm the beta, while they the alpha male and they trying to correct the race. Man, get the fuck out of here, man. That's why I get their ass this work, because they're backward and they're rearward in their thinking. You see what I'm saying? Who wanted to? Oh yeah, go ahead, Faith.
Oh, I was just really enjoying you going off there for a second.
Right. Yeah, I started to get going on the rant, but I had to kind of reel it back in.
No, it's totally fine. I totally get you on that. But I really wanted to go back to something that Dr. Grandison said earlier, to one of my earlier questions when he was talking about Black men needing to secure the environment. And I wanted to pose this to Dr. Grandison because I grew up in the hood, okay? I am not ashamed of it. I'm not in the hood now. I worked my way out of my own recognizances. Strong, independent woman, okay? Got out of the jungle, but I'm still, not too far removed from it, because we as Black people, we always are not too far removed from poverty. We always know somebody, whether it be a friend or someone in our family, that's in that situation. And so I wanted to ask Dr. Grandison, with growing up in the hood and seeing how the men destroyed the environment by, the gang activity, the introduction of the crack era, and basically the predatory behavior of the men on the young women and some of the boys too. I just wanted to ask, just you saying that you were looking at the science of the whole thing. I mean, did you study that at all, in your teachings and looking at, just the community as a whole, like from the ages and how, how it didn't work, how we didn't secure our environment, and how it just kind of changed into that chaotic situation that a lot of us grew up in?
Yes, I studied that quite a bit. I put a lot of that information, several chapters in my book, and on my YouTube channel. I said this earlier. There's a content called Neo Group Selection. It's in several parts. You should watch each part of that, because it shows how the ecology is constructed in such a way as to put the Black community under the pressure it's under. If we're talking about minority populations in Western nations now, so I'm not talking about, let's say, Nigeria or Jamaica or whatever. Those are countries where it's a complete Black population. But if we're talking about minority Black populations in Western nations, the behavior towards them, the social interaction that takes place in those societies, to some degree, it's crafted to keep them at the lower levels of that society. The human response against that is going to be to push against it, to try to raise your rank up while they're trying to push you down. Now, of course, they have the structural and institutional power in that society. So they can use those institutions, they can use that structural power to harm your population in several different ways. Now, because these are all male-dominated societies, right? So men compete much more intensely against each other. They want to control women, but they want men under their heel, because a population of men that's dominant can only be overcome by another population of men. That's how it's happened throughout our history. So this is how our psychology is kind of geared.
But let me interject real quickly.
Sure.
Because in growing up in the hood and just having firsthand, just being a part of that environment and seeing firsthand what happened in that environment, I saw that there were good men in the hood, you know, when I was growing up, and this was like in the early 80s. And those good men did try to protect their children. They did try to protect their family. They were getting up, going to work every day, and they were being the example. But the example of fast money through the you know, selling drugs in the crack era, and those group of guys, those examples became the primary source of what Black men looked at as being I guess what they wanted for manhood, instead of the example of the Black men that were getting up and going to work every day. And so what ended up happening is the Black men that were trying to fight against that element coming in, a lot of them got hurt, killed, and ran out of the community. So
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I saw the same thing. So when I was coming up as a teenager in central Brooklyn, so you're talking about the models where we can see some Black men going to work, they're professionals, and then, but we see a lot of other guys, you know, with the fancy cars, the rims, the clothes, the girls, and they're hustling. You know, they're gangsters or they're selling drugs. Now these guys are models as well, and you're going to have Black men who would go both ways. So there were some men who were looking at the good models and copying. Now maybe they, depending on the area, they may be in the minority. So if it's in, let's say, a working class area, you had, let's say, a high level of single parent families, and the successful male models that a lot of the young guys were seeing were guys who were doing it wrong. Well, what they're seeing is success. They're not seeing the behavior that they practiced to get the success. They're seeing success, and success is what they want. So if they were successful having a gun, hustling, and that's how they got the car and the clothes and the girls, because remember now, these men who were doing these things, they had a lot of girls, right? You'd have to admit that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and that's how they pretty much sold that image to the other men, and they were able to get the other men on board.
Exactly. So if you narrow the mainstream opportunities for young men to get success or even to see successful models, then you're going to have more poor behavior patterns amongst those males. Now, and again, I see this in many different ethnic groups and racial groups, because I'm here in the United Kingdom, and I can see this among young white Scottish men, where they're joining the same gangs that their fathers were in. They're hustling, they're selling drugs, they're getting addicted, and they're stabbing and killing each other. But they're in that ecology. So with that modeling, you get more and more young men following that pattern. Now, there are other things happening. Now, there are some unique things Black people face, because those young white guys in Scotland, they're not facing those problems because they're white. They're facing it because they're low, working class, because of the economic problems in that society, but it's not against them because of their race. So we would have those same problems too, but then we have the added thing of discrimination as well. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about cultural dysfunctions, and that can be somewhat separate from racial discrimination or racism, because there can be many different ways that bad culture gets into your community. Obviously, part of it was white supremacy, but there's other stuff too. So we have to address those factors as well. But what you're talking about here is an ecology where a lot of the models, the adult models in terms of males, and males will pay more attention to the men because they want to be successful the same way the men are. They will follow that pattern. And I understand the temptation. I had it myself. You know, when I was 16, 17, I saw the guys who had a lot of stuff going on and were doing it wrong. And I certainly wanted what they had, but I knew, yeah, you know what, that's dangerous, it's illegal, and it's wrong. And it could be upbringing, it could be my own individual variation or whatever. I made the right choices for the most part. I didn't really engage in any of the gangster stuff or the drug stuff. I certainly had a lot of friends who did. Now, they didn't want to do it just to sell drugs or walk around with a gun. They wanted to be important. They wanted to have some cachet, some respect. And that is the attraction, because they see those young men who may be doing wrong, but we know in our communities, a lot of these young men are actually respected in those local environments. People look up to them. So once they have that, this is again when I talked about with the social learning. If these men are respected, if they've got status and women, you're going to have a whole lot of young men copying that.
Yep. And this and one of the things about it, it's funny we're talking about the crack epidemic here, because what I've uh uh characterized what's going on today with social media and things of this nature is it's kind of like the digital version of the crack era, right? And this is the what I find dangerous about it, because it's the exact same thing, where now you have these fellows on these platforms, YouTube and other platforms, and what they do is they'll have these props that convey masculinity. It's kind of like the same thing. So you'll see them with sunglasses, you'll see them with a cigar, and these things are to convey masculinity, success. I'm in charge. I'm in control, and they'll put these messages out here, and these messages are they're talking about women, but they're targeting younger men because they're attempting to influence these younger men, and as if that is supposed to be the models that we pattern ourselves after. But if you got a hardworking man who's a family man doing what he needs to do for his family, they'll act as if somehow he's a simp, or he's a cuck, or he's a beta. See, he ain't got no red pill game. You see what I'm saying? And it's the exact same thing. It's an updated version of the digital crack era. It's the digital crack era. It's the exact same thing. And
But
so
now,
now we have.
Mary,
Mhm.
if you really think about it, though, these men are not going to give up on that mentality, that pimp hood mentality, because it's something that has been
Mhm.
working for them. It is the only thing that has allowed them to control their environment and to somewhat get control over their women and to subdue the men that would have come against them. So if you don't have anything to replace that with, exactly how are you going to convince these men to do something better?
Well,
Well,
well, go ahead. Who's that to say?
I would say this pimp and wherever mentality said fate, it only applies to very few men that could pull off. Most men may want to live vicariously in that, but as you know how the internet works, the complaints, a lot of men don't got it like that. Because if you ask of some, that means you don't got it. The ones that's doing it, they're doing it, and even go as far. And you heard before, Mary, that they try to teach other men how to get the same game because they have mastered it. That's how I look at it.
Mhm. Well, yeah, but see, that's exactly what I'm saying. Precisely because it is a few who actually doing it. That kind of ups the status of it. You see what I'm saying? What I'm saying is there's messaging being put out that's cooler, and actually being a family man working for his family, wife, and children is somehow square or lesser or beta or simp. You see what I'm saying? And that's the point that I'm making. And now we're competing with it uh, with mass media. It's a reason why everybody is on here trying to get a viral video. A viral video. It's a virus, so it infects the
It's
social norms,
currency.
the social cognition, the way we view these things, and people will adapt it and buy into it. And this is what Mr. Granderson is talking about.
Yeah.
You see,
It's all
so
the
that's what.
yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
Well, no, just
Yes.
let me. That's what we're up against. With that's what we're up against.
Yeah. All
Like,
that
I
and
mean,
then
think.
okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying, think about it. Like, you had, this is the most unmarried group of men on the planet, and yet they have all these opinions and stuff about marriage as if they know. You see what I'm saying? And really, when you listen to them, all they're doing is parroting one another. And then, like, even with what the pro-social behaviors that we was talking about, and tearing each other down, shifting the culture. Listen, why do you think you have, after what Kevin Samuels was able to accomplish, and gain all of this status and this prestige and this money from tearing down a black woman, and now guess what everybody's going to want to do? They're going to want to try and mimic that. They're going to want to try and replicate that because they saw it was successful for him. You see, but in a very real way, what is it doing to the actual fabric of our community and of our relationships? We know what it's doing. It's adverse, and it's going to have a negative effect.
You about to say, Mr.
Exactly.
Great
Grandson?
point, Amiri. Great point.
Hmm. So, I mean, does anybody have anything else? We've been on almost 3 hours. Does anybody have anything else? And you know, it's later where Mr. Grandison is than where we are. So I know he has things to do and get out of here. So anybody have anything else for him before I let him go and we get out of here?
No, that was pretty much it for me. I just wanted to know,
Okay.
what else, we could offer Black men, to kind of get
Mhm.
them off that mindset, that
Right.
trajectory and mindset of, glorifying the pimp hood mentality.
Right, yeah, and and I've actually talked about the history of that. It wasn't always like that. You had the rise of what they call black exploitation, and that's really where you get that from. You know, that the first black exploitation movie, Sweetback's badass song, streetwise pimp and hustler who's also a revolutionary and standing up for his people. I talked about that, man. That's where we get this from. And so this is what we've been dealing with since about the 1970s. Superfly, yeah, Superfly, Ron O'Neal. You see what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
while the type of man that we need is looked down and they cast dispersions upon. You know what I'm saying? So and that why y'all think I always tell them now all of a sudden they clutching their invisible pearls and they just trying to giving these one-sided narratives because they don't want to just be honest. That for a lot of this stuff that they're complaining about, they signed up for the bullshit. You know, um, and now just want to use these talking points as a cudgel to bludgeon black women with because they're trying to do exactly what I'm talking about with Kevin Samuels. They're trying to get a viral video moment so that they can get success, prestige, and money. You know, so
Yeah, and they also want to cover themselves for a lot of the things that they had been doing in the environment as well. So they need
Mhm.
Black women to be the scapegoat.
Right, yeah, yeah, yep. And it's just gonna always be more readily visible with the women and the men. I mean, when you have the type of uh gender racial imbalance we have, and you have more black women in the given area than black men, then it's just going to be more readily visible with black women and black men because precisely because so many of them are missing. So you can see the effects, but you can't really. It's harder to see the causes. You have to use like what Mr. Grandson is talking about, the scientific approach to actually see the cause. Why y'all think I always go back to the empiricism? Because that's where you can see the actual causes at. A lot of times what gets discussed in these spaces as the cause is nothing but the effect. So people just don't want to be honest. But I mean that's all I have. I know Mr. Grandison has to go. I appreciate what in the world, beige niggers. Believe this is your first time on a panel. I appreciate it. Um, People in the chat room, all the people who supported the super chats. Y'all know what it is. Y'all know what we do
Wait,
here.
wait, wait. Before you stop,
Well, go ahead, Cass,
Mr.
go ahead.
Grandson, Mr. Grandson, one important question to ask because the celebrities here in America. Um, is the celebrities where you at in UK are as easily controlled like the ones up here in America, the ones that have influence?
When you say easily controlled, you mean
Like,
like
like,
by
like,
or
I mean, in
mainstream
general, like,
culture and things like that?
yeah, that and more, because some of them are aware of what they're doing, but they continue doing it regardless of more popular money, and are even knowing the repercussions because they have the bigger influence hold on the youth. Do you have that same issue in the UK?
Yeah, we have that same issue because when you're the minority population and the host population have this power to basically destroy your career if you don't follow the party line, so to speak. Most celebrities in this country and in your country will tend not to want to challenge that because it will cut them off. Not everyone does, and we certainly have some who try to speak up, like Idris Elba is doing
Mhm.
some things. He's speaking up against racism or cultural problems because he's talking about some of the male violence problems here, but he's also talked about some of the discriminatory problems going on. We do see a lot more of that taking place now. I wouldn't say to the degree it needs to, because it's still more of an assimilationist vibe, right? In terms of not necessarily just speaking to the community, it's much more about speaking to the mainstream culture on how to treat Black people better or things like that. And I'm not as much in that mode as I am about helping ourselves get better by ourselves. And then when we're in a stronger position, we can deal with some of the outside factors that are harming us, because you can't really do that before you're well internally. And our celebrities can really help with that. But a lot of them actually don't know enough, I think, to say the right things. They're not involved in enough of the learning in terms of how do we get the community stronger. They're in an excellent position with their platforms to speak to that. But I think a lot of them have to actually learn a bit more to give us the right guidance, because we will listen to them. It is human nature to copy successful people. But those successful people, just like what we were hearing from Faith a moment ago, if we've got bad models, they're transmitting bad culture. So if we can get them to learn a bit more and transmit the right guidance and ideas and behaviors, because we do need to see more than just talk. We need to see what you'd call a credibility enhancing display. So that's like talking the talk, but walking the walk too. We need to see you behave in the way you're speaking, and then we will copy you, and that will really help. So these celebrities need to be more informed. But you're right, they're under a lot of pressure to conform, because they can have their careers harmed if they don't do, what, the mainstream society wants them to do.
Any words of wisdom for the people to end the note on?
Yeah, I would say, look, there's in terms of, like, me and Amiri talked offline, a lot of the stuff going on in the manosphere and the response to it. And, I know they do talk about some things that are legit, right? So let's say, suicide rates and mental health issues with men, or custody rights things. Those are good things to talk about that we have to address.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of them are talking a whole lot of foolishness, because they just want to boost up themselves. And the point Amiri made, other people, they're trying to be Kevin Samuels now, a lot of them. And that's moving us in the wrong direction. And we got to stop listening to these people. We got to become more informed. So I really like what Amiri is doing, because I see him bringing on different people, speaking very informatively with a lot of evidence, and really trying to get us in a place where we're using the right knowledge to spread the right kinds of understandings and behaviors, and start to work together as a community to get it right. Now, we have to make an effort. Unfortunately, we're not in the position where we're going to learn a lot of this unconsciously. We have to actually do the homework and do the learning, read, gather more information. It's great if we can get it in this form, because this is a very quick form, but we do need a whole lot more, because we actually do need a lot of construction. I heard Amiri say this earlier, how we're listening to Andrew Tate, and he's saying, oh, it's all this social engineering that's going on today that's making things bad and giving women power and stuff. Human beings have always been about social engineering. That's what culture does. It engineers our behaviors as a group. It's just whether it's good and positive and adaptive, or whether it's maladaptive. So what we need is a whole lot more positive cultural and social engineering. But these guys get on, their platforms, these Andrew Tates and, Kevin Samuels and so on. I'm not saying everything Kevin Samuels said was bad. Some of it certainly was bad, and about self-inflation or making men feel good about something that isn't really constructive or helpful to our community. Now, some things he said were good, so I want to be fair there, but we do need a lot more broadcasting of what's positive and helpful towards us. So, I'd like to end on that note there, that it's the 21st century, and we absolutely have to be scientific about how we are going to construct our communities in ways that solve our problems and advance us as a people. Because if we don't do that, like I said, we're going to be headed for a whole lot more trouble than we understand.
There you
Exactly.
have it, Mary.
Exactly.
There you have it.
Yeah, and that was so eloquently put, Mr. Grandison. I definitely appreciate it. Can't wait to bring you back on. And that's what we're about over here. We're not just we're not just gender bangers. We're not just an entertainment based channel. Of course, we want to, got to understand it can't be too lofty. People get bored with it, but we want to bring actual real information, and not just bring information for the sake of bringing information, but actually bring information that's practical and that can be applied. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Y'all know what it is. This is the Amiri Brown Show, authentic social commentary. We out of here. Peace.